Winter Lord, starting from the Daily Intelligence. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 1 Daily Intelligence System. A biting wind howled, whipping snow and ice against the withered tree trunks by the roadside. Lewis sat in a rickety carriage, the wheels creaking dully as they rolled over the hard, icy earth. He looked down at the Northern Territory Lord's expeditionary certificate bearing the royal seal in his hand, a bitter smile creeping across his face. 3 months ago, he was struck by a dump truck and transported to another world, his soul transmigrating into the body of Louis Calvin, the son of Duke Calvin. However, reborn as a celestial dragon, he hadn't even enjoyed a single day of comfort before being appointed expeditionary baron, tasked with conquering his own territory in the north. This was far from a good thing. The north was perpetually frozen, barren, and desolate, threatened by the glacier giants, a place no human could inhabit. Although the empire nominally controlled the north, many areas remained under the control of the remnants of the Snow Kingdom. Even 2 years ago, a large-scale rebellion nearly caused the north to secede from the empire, taking a heavy toll to suppress. The empire thus realized that relying solely on the northern nobles was insufficient for long-term stability. Therefore, the emperor ordered the sons of various noble families to go to the north as pioneer lords, exchanging their lands for their power to stabilize the borders. This also weakened the power of some nobles, a win-win situation. Of course, the nobles weren't fools. They saw through the emperor's scheme and mostly sent only the less capable members of their families to appease him. Louis was one of them. As the least capable of Duke Calvin's 12 sons, he naturally became the first choice. After receiving his pioneer certificate, his family gave him 800 gold coins, several carts of grain, 3 elite knights, 10 regular knights, and 30 apprentice knights, urging him to set off immediately. Judging from this lineup, Duke Calvin had no intention of letting his useless son establish himself in the north. As long as he didn't die on the way, dying in the north would be considered a completed mission. It was all about participation. No one believed Louis could survive in the north, even he himself lacked confidence. A recent graduate, suddenly thrown into this freezing, perilous place, how is he supposed to survive? Louis tugged at his cloak, but still couldn't ward off the bone-chilling cold. He couldn't help but curse under his breath, damn it, aren't all transmigrators supposed to have a cheat system? Why don't I have anything? Just as he finished speaking, a mechanical female voice sounded in his mind. Daily Intelligence System loading. Louis was stunned. Before he could react, information about the intelligence system flooded into his mind. Daily Intelligence System. Every day, it would randomly push several pieces of intelligence related to him, covering resource locations, personal secrets, and even future events. This cheat system was arguably the most ideal tool for a pioneering lord. The Northern Territory was a place full of uncertainty, with various dangers, but also many opportunities. In this environment, the important intelligence push by the daily system helped him avoid danger and acquire resources. This undoubtedly paved the way for him to become a powerful lord. More importantly, even in the worst-case scenario, the daily intelligence alerts allowed him to escape in advance. Having understood all this, Louis could no longer suppress his elation and chuckled aloud. The dreary path of a lord's conquest had finally seen a glimmer of hope. Daily Intelligence System loading complete. With a notification sound, a semi-transparent screen appeared before Louis's eyes, displaying several lines of text rapidly. Daily Intelligence Update Complete 1. The third prince of the Iron Blood Empire, while inspecting the stables at noon today, was framed and fell into a manure pit, drowning. 2. Duke Calvin's 10th daughter has been born. 3 kilometers to the west, a glacial crevasse will reveal schools of northern crystal coditron. 4. Night Roy has mixed frost scorpion venom into your dinner soup. Filled with excitement, Louis read through the messages one by one. The first 2 pieces of information offered little help in his current predicament, at most providing some psychological comfort. For example, mocking the third prince's misfortune in the court intrigue, and once again marveling at his father's boundless energy and astonishing fertility. But when his gaze fell on the third intelligence report, his eyes froze. 3 kilometers to the west, A glacial crevasse will reveal schools of northern crystal cod at dawn. Northern crystal cod. This was a rare and highly sought-after delicacy. Before setting off for the north, to avoid being left to die, Lewis had crammed a considerable amount of information about the north, including this fish. They lived in extremely cold waters, and their flesh was not only delicious, but most importantly, their bones contained a special substance that could purify impurities in a knight's bloodline, enhancing their strength. This stuff was incredibly rare and valuable on the market. This wasn't just about taste, it was an opportunity to make money, build connections, and boost combat power. This system had come at the perfect time. He had been worrying about how to establish himself in the north, and now the opportunity had been delivered right to his doorstep. Calming himself, Lewis continued reading, then his smile suddenly froze. Knight Roy has mixed frost scorpion venom into your dinner broth. Lewis's Adam's apple bobbed, and his gaze unconsciously swept towards the knights bustling about in the distance. They were setting up camp around the fire, some pitching tents, others unloading their horses' gear. Several knights responsible for cooking were preparing ingredients, pouring chopped meat and wild vegetables into a large pot, steam rising slowly in the cold night. A knight with a simple, honest face was half squatting beside the pot, stirring the broth. It was Roy. A chill ran down Lewis's spine. A formal knight assigned to him by his family was actually plotting to kill him. He had thought that although these formal knights looked down on him, they at least obeyed his orders as their lord. He never expected that someone would be planning to send him to his death. Being banished to this god-forsaken place was bad enough, but before he even arrived, someone couldn't resist making a move. Damn it, it's impossible to guard against everything. Fortunately, there was the daily intelligence system, otherwise he might have been dead already. A knight's voice came from outside the carriage, mingled with the whistling of the cold wind. My lord, dinner is ready. Lewis straightened his clothes, then slowly lifted the curtain and stepped down from the carriage. The firelight illuminated the camp, and the hot broth in the iron pot bubbled and steamed. The rich aroma, mixed with the cold wind, filled the air, unconsciously whetting one's appetite. The knights sat around the campfire, not yet eating. As was customary, he, as the lord, had to finish eating before the others could begin. Lewis's gaze swept over the group, finally settling on the iron pot, a smile playing on his lips. Chapter 2 The sun will always rise. The poisoned broth, emanating an enticing aroma, sat in a wooden bowl. Lewis took the soup from the knight, slowly raising it to his lips, but suddenly stopped, turning to hand the bowl to Roy. I have no appetite. You drink it for me. Roy's face stiffened, forcing a smile. My lord, this is against protocol. Please eat first, I command you, drink it. Lewis's tone suddenly turned stern. Roy's lips paled slightly, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He knew perfectly well what was in the soup. If he drank it, he would surely die. Captain Lambert also noticed the anomaly and gave a signal to the surrounding knights. Several immediately rose and surrounded Roy. Drink it, Lambert said in a low voice. The scalding broth was forcibly brought to his lips. Seeing he could no longer evade the situation, Roy suddenly tried to escape, but was held firmly down. Only then did the other knights truly realize that the soup was poisoned. Lewis stood up, looking down at Roy, who was pinned to the ground. You know the consequences of plotting against a lord, don't you? Roy's eyes were filled with fear. He certainly knew the consequences. Who ordered you to poison him? Lewis's voice was calm and unhurried. Roy answered in a trembling voice, It was Lord Selton. He ordered me to poison him. Selton was Duke Calvin's second son, Lewis's older brother. The knights' gazes all turned to Lewis. They were all knights of the Calvin family, well aware of the power struggles between the brothers. But even before the lord had firmly established himself, he had been stabbed in the back by someone from his own family. It was still chilling. Roy continued haltingly, he promised, if I poisoned you, he would let me return to the south and give me a new position, at least a captain of the knights. Upon hearing this, the faces of the knights surrounding him became even more grim. Lewis chuckled softly. If he guessed correctly, his brother was trying to completely eliminate future competitors for the title. The Calvin family's ducal succession was not primogeniture, but succession by the strongest. No matter how useless Lewis is now, as long as he lives, he is still a descendant of Duke Calvin and still has the right to inherit the throne. Moreover, if he dies on the way to the north, the family will surely send another brother to take his place and complete the mission. In other words, Selton can not only eliminate a competitor but also continue to weaken the other brothers in the family, killing two birds with one stone, a truly clever plan. Roy still had a sliver of hope. He looked at Lewis pleadingly. "My lord, I was forced. I'm just a knight. Lord Selton ordered me, and I dared not disobey. Please spare my life. I am willing to serve you, Lambert," Lewis said calmly. "Yes." The captain of the knights stepped forward and drew his longsword. Roy panicked completely and struggled desperately. "My lord, spare me. I will never." Splat! A flash of silver light, and blood splattered on the snow. Roy's pleas for mercy came to an abrupt end. His head rolled to the ground, his eyes wide open in death. Lambert sheathed his sword and said calmly, "The traitor has been brought to justice," but the atmosphere in the camp was somewhat subtle. The knights watching remained silent, a complex emotion flickering in their eyes. Roy betrayed his lord and deserved to die, that was an indisputable fact. But was his action truly driven by greed? He wanted to return to the south, not want to perish in this cold wasteland. And what about them? Weren't they the same? Everyone knew what going to the north to expand their territory meant. This was a land of exile, a territory with the highest mortality rate. No one came willingly, and no one didn't want to go back. At this moment, no one dared to look at the head rolling on the ground, afraid of seeing their own face reflected in the severed head. Confusion and helplessness washed over them like a tide. In the darkness, the campfire burned, clearly reflecting the emotions in their eyes. Lewis saw this and stepped forward. "Those who want to go back can leave now." Everyone was startled and looked up at him. "I will personally write to the family to clear your names." Lewis paused, his gaze sweeping across each face. "But after today, anyone who leaves will suffer the same fate as Roy." No one spoke, and no one dared to move. They weren't stupid. Even with Lewis's letter, the family might not forgive their dereliction of duty. What awaited them was likely an even more severe punishment. Staying in the north might mean certain death, but returning might not guarantee survival either. Lewis looked at the silent knights and suddenly chuckled softly. He sheathed his previous chilling aura, his voice becoming calm. "You all think coming to the north is suicide. You also know why you were sent here. Isn't it because you have no backing within your families, so you can be discarded like trash?" Lewis paused, his tone suddenly becoming firm and powerful. "But I don't think so. You are not trash. You became novice knights, even full knights, through talent, through hard work, through countless real battles. And those who sent you here? They're nothing but a bunch of parasites hiding in their castles, indulging in food, drink, and pleasure." He slowly scanned the crowd, a hint of wavering appearing in each person's eyes. "Have you ever considered the possibility that we might survive in this frozen wasteland? What if we could establish ourselves here? Perhaps the darkness before dawn will be long, but the sun will always rise. I don't know if we can all live to see that day, but I swear by the dragon ancestor, if that day comes, I will share the glory brought by the sun with you all." Lewis slowly scanned the crowd, a hint of wavering appearing in each person's eyes. "To the Calvin family, you are insignificant, pawns to be sacrificed at any moment. But in this land of opportunity, anything is possible. One of you may one day become a baron, a viscount, or even an earl. Of course, you can continue to wallow in your fate, continue to lament yourselves, and consider yourselves half-buried, or you can join me on this abandoned land and firmly grasp your future in your own hands." Silence. A deathly silence. The night wind howled, the campfire flickered, illuminating the complex faces on their faces. Suddenly, a low thud broke the silence. Knight Captain Lambert knelt on one knee, his right fist slamming into his chest. "I swear to follow you to the death, my lord." Then, the second, the third, the fourth. "I swear to follow you to the death, my lord. I swear to follow you to the death, my lord." One after another, the knights knelt, their right fists pounding their hearts. Chapter 3. The kindness you've shown me is far from over. The next morning, after the inspirational speech the previous night, the knights' spirits had noticeably changed. They were no longer just mechanically carrying out their missions, their movements were faster, and a fighting spirit shone in their eyes. Some began to proactively check their equipment, some discussed the situation in the north, and some even started thinking about how to set up their camp. Although the pie in Lewis's sky seemed so distant, having a goal to pursue was far better than waiting aimlessly for death. Of course, Lewis knew that a passionate speech alone couldn't completely change their mindset. Without tangible benefits, their morale would quickly dissipate again. He had to immediately offer real benefits to give these knights genuine hope. On the frozen river, the cold wind howled. The knights looked at the thick layer of ice beneath their feet, exchanging doubtful glances. "Can you really catch fish here?" someone muttered. "The Lord said so, let's give it a try." Lambert was the first to swing his hammer and smash it hard against the ice. Many knights chuckled inwardly. Did this lord really think he could catch fish by simply finding a river, breaking open a crack, and doing so? He was far too naive. But no one dared disobey Lewis's orders, so the knights followed his instructions, wielding their weapons and beginning to break the ice. Thump, thump, thump. Soon, a narrow crack appeared, and deep, icy river water surged forth. A large net was slowly lowered into the water, and everyone held their breath, staring intently at the crack. Suddenly, the net tightened. Pull. The next second, a flash of silver light, and a northern crystal cod was pulled from the water, struggling on the ice. Good heavens, there really are fish. Quick, quick, scoop them up. Don't let them get away. The knights joined in, excitedly waving the net. With each lowering and pulling up, one after another, silvery white northern crystal cod were caught, their scales reflecting a dazzling light in the morning sun. They counted them, 12 in total. At this moment, a knowledgeable knight excitedly exclaimed, "This is northern crystal cod. A rare delicacy found only in the frigid lands. Its bones can purify bloodlines and enhance strength." Hearing this, the knights' breathing quickened. They understood what bloodline purification meant. It meant not only an immediate increase in strength, but also a significant boost to knight's future potential. Even nobles might only taste such a treasure a few times in their entire lives. If only they could have a sip. Just as they were lost in their fantasies, Lewis's casual words rang in their ears. "Half of these fish are for you. We'll make fish soup later." These few words exploded like thunder among the knights. This was something they never dared to dream of. When had these knights, exiled to the north, ever received such a favor? The knights erupted in jubilation. "Lord, are you serious?" One knight suddenly looked up, his voice trembling slightly with excitement. This is northern crystal cod. Even the nobles of the south might only get to eat it a few times in their entire lives. Long live the Lord! Excitement, shock, disbelief, a mix of emotions mingled and finally coalesced into shouts of praise. Soon, a large pot was placed over the campfire, the boiling fish soup bubbling and releasing a rich, fragrant aroma. After being simmered, the soup turned a pale silvery white, as if specks of light were flowing within it, like a gift from heaven. Once the soup had thickened, bowls were ladled out and handed to the knights. "Is it really drinkable?" One knight held his wooden bowl, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. "Enough talk, drink it." Lewis picked up his bowl and drank it down without hesitation. The soup slid down his throat, its energy rapidly spreading from his stomach to his limbs, an invisible warm current washing away impurities from his blood. Seeing this, the other knights eagerly picked up their bowls and gulped down the fish soup. The moment the heat flowed into their throats, their movements froze for a split second, as if something was awakening within them. The next instant, they all sat cross-legged, closed their eyes, and focused their minds, rapidly circulating their breathing techniques, greedily absorbing this indescribable energy, afraid of wasting even a single drop. Some trembled slightly, feeling the cleansing sensation deep within their blood, an unprecedented lightness spreading through their bodies. Others gritted their teeth, enduring the churning heat within, as if their bones and blood were undergoing some kind of reshaping. The camp was silent, save for the steady breathing that rose and fell, converging into an invisible resonance. Suddenly, a cry of surprise broke the silence. My body!" A young apprentice knight's eyes widened, a strange light appearing deep within his pupils. Boom! A faint silver light emanated from him, and the knights all froze, their pupils shrinking sharply. The aura of a full-fledged knight. He's advanced. Before the words were even finished, another apprentice knight trembled violently, a faint light emanating from his body. He too had broken through to a higher realm. A deathly silence followed by a deafening roar. "He's insane. He's truly insane." He broke through after just one bowl of fish soup. The knights' gazes towards Lewis had completely changed. Just a few hours ago, they were still doubting what qualifications this useless lord, exiled to the north, had to lead them. Were his promises truly reliable? Was the dawn he spoke of just wishful thinking? But now, all doubts had transformed into boundless reverence. They had witnessed 2 apprentice knights break through to full-fledged knights in a short period. In the southern noble territories, such a feat required a long period of training and a massive accumulation of resources, but here, it was merely a bowl of fish soup. Even the other knights, who hadn't directly advanced, had seen their strength increase significantly. This was simply unbelievable, even making them wonder if it was an illusion. And all of this was brought about by Lewis's casual gesture, obtaining such a precious treasure. They were, of course, unaware of the intelligence network's existence. They simply felt Lewis had received divine favor. What astonished them most was Lord Lewis's generosity in sharing these northern crystal cod with them. These were precious items even nobles couldn't afford, yet Lewis had so easily shared them with them. At this moment, all the knights were deeply grateful to Lewis, and no one questioned his promise from the previous night. All doubts had been cast aside. Now, only one common goal remained in their hearts: to unite behind Lewis and embrace their bright future. Long live the Lord! Long live Lord Lewis! The knights shouted in unison, their excited voices echoing across the icy northern lands. Lord Lewis's kindness was boundless. Chapter 4: Useless people gather in the north. Lewis sat cross-legged, adjusting his breathing, and the tidal breathing technique within his body naturally began to operate. Inhale, exhale, deep, long breaths echoed in his chest, like the ebb and flow of the tide, absorbing and refining the energy brought by the northern crystal cod. The tidal breathing technique was the Calvin family's inherited breathing technique. Centered on the surging of bloodline like the ebb and flow of the tide, it emphasized circulation, unleashing power when the tide rises and returning to stability when the tide falls. Under the wash of this warm yet violent energy, Lewis's bloodline seemed to be reshaped. He could feel the speed of blood flow in his body increasing, his meridians becoming clearer, and even his bones feeling slightly hot, as if undergoing a transformation. Finally, he slowly exhaled, the heat within his body gradually subsiding and returning to calm. He had advanced. Intermediate rank formal knight. Such strength at such a young age would be considered 1 in a million among ordinary people. But among Duke Calvin's offspring, he was still just a bottom-tier waste. After all, his elder brother was already a top-tier knight, renowned for his military exploits and meritorious service to the empire. In this world, a knight's power stems from the awakening of their bloodline. Not everyone can become a knight, only those with sufficiently powerful bloodlines can activate the dormant knightly power within them. The path of a knight is divided into 6 main stages: apprentice knight, regular knight, elite knight, extraordinary knight, top-tier knight, and legendary knight, each with a vast chasm. Of course, Lewis was no longer in a hurry. With a daily intelligence system at his disposal, future opportunities would not be lacking. After thoroughly absorbing the essence of the fish soup, Lewis slowly stopped his tidal breathing technique and opened his eyes. He immediately noticed that the knights around him were looking at him with adoration. The next second, deafening cheers resounded throughout the camp. Long live the Lord! Hearing the thunderous cheers, Lewis finally breathed a sigh of relief. This meant that his prestige had been initially established, and at least for the time being, he no longer needed to worry about the knights' loyalty. After the cheers subsided, Lewis looked at Lambert beside him and asked, "How far is it from here to Prosperous City?" Lambert respectfully replied, "About 200 kilometers, that's a 5 or 6 day journey." Lewis nodded slightly, then decisively ordered, "Speed up and try to arrive by the afternoon of 3 days later." Lambert respectfully responded, "Understood." Under normal circumstances, the team would never travel so quickly, especially on this icy wasteland. But now, the knights' morale was at its peak, more than enough to complete such a marching objective. Prosperous City, the capital of the northern province, is also the most important military and political center in the north. Lewis's main task on this trip was to choose his own territory to expand into, and naturally, the sooner he chose, the greater the benefits. But what truly made him eager to go to Prosperous City were the 3 pieces of intelligence that the system refreshed today. 1. 3 days later, Will, who possesses the potential of a peak knight, will be taken to the Prosperous City black market by slave traders. 2. 3 days later, alchemy apprentice Hilko was wanted by the Golden Marrow Guild for stealing a secret formula. Disguised as a slave, he was taken to the Prosperous City black market by slave traders. 3. Duke Edmund was furious because various families were sending their spoiled sons to the north. The first piece of information greatly surprised Lewis. In this world, peak knights are considered top-tier combat power, although not as rare as legendary knights. However, Almost every peak knight is a military commander or a pillar of the kingdom, regarded as a cornerstone by any power. Will may not have fully matured yet, but his talent to reach the peak knight level alone makes him worth Lewis's investment. The second piece of information was also extremely valuable. In this world, alchemists are similar to chemists, skilled in processing various magical items, and even able to transform cheap materials into high-value items. They are scarce talent sought after by various powers. The Calvin family has only 3 formal alchemists. Although alchemy apprentices are not yet fully mature, they are still extremely scarce. Lewis's plan was simple. First, pretend to casually buy Hilco, then secretly observe him. If he proved to have potential and pose no danger, keep him and train him. After all, the price of a slave shouldn't be too high. As for the third point, even without an intelligence system, Lewis could guess what was going on. The various families were vying to send their good-for-nothing sons to the north, infuriating Duke Edmund, the provincial governor. But from Lewis's perspective, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. If handled properly, it could become part of his plan. Since Frostspear City held so many opportunities, he had to get there as soon as possible. Damn it! These parasites who only know how to suck blood. The Empire sent them to guard the north, not to send a bunch of good-for-nothings to drag us down. In the governor's office, thick reports were slammed onto the desk. Papers flew everywhere, reflecting Duke Edmund's furious face. 2 years ago, a rebellion nearly caused the entire north to slip out of the Empire's control. The rebels even breached the outer walls of Frostspear City. Duke Edmund led his elite troops in a bloody 3-month battle, barely managing to suppress the rebels. But what was the price? Border fortresses were destroyed, granaries burned, the army lost more than half its strength, and his only son was dead. Order in the entire north has yet to be fully restored. This time, the emperor finally realized that simply stationing troops was not enough to maintain stability. So he devised a strategy of sending noble sons to the north to expand their territories, hoping to use their strength to stabilize the border. But these foolish noble families, did they really want to send their family elites to the north to fight to the death? What a joke. A bunch of good-for-nothings were sent to the north. Although there were some normal people, they were a minority. Duke Edmund laughed angrily, grabbed the report and flipped through it casually. Look at what kind of trash they sent. The third son of the Elwyn family, rumored to be a gambling addict, his gambling debts enough to buy 3 mansions in the capital. The young master of the Grant family, said to be only 15 years old, yet already a guest of honor in the Empire's major brothels. Duke Calvin's 8th son, a lazy bum, relied on his family's resources to become a low-ranking knight, a complete waste. A bunch of noble sons? They've sent me brothels, gamblers, and good-for-nothings. A bunch of pampered idiots. Their ancestors fought and bled to build this empire, and now all they know is power struggles and backstabbing. They care nothing for the safety of the empire but their own family interests, Duke Edmund roared, slamming his fist on the table, the thick wooden surface groaning under the weight. The atmosphere in the room was oppressive, the staff bowing their heads, afraid to speak. After a long pause, Edmund took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing his anger, and sat back down in his chair, his gaze chilling. Fine. Since these idiots have come, let them fend for themselves. The North must rely on itself. Chapter 5: Choosing a Territory. On the snow-covered ground, a caravan of over 40 knights slowly approached Frostspear City. In the center of the caravan, a black carriage moved smoothly, its roof adorned with a crimson banner bearing a crescent moon. Such a grand procession naturally attracted the attention of the city gate guards, who warily watched the approaching figures. As they neared the gate, a tall, slender young man alighted from the carriage. He raised his hand to remove his hood, revealing a handsome face. I am Lewis Calvin, the Imperial Baron of the Frontiers, here to pay my respects to Duke Edmund. Several soldiers exchanged glances, surprise evident in their eyes. The Calvin family was one of the 8 great families of the Ironblood Empire, possessing considerable renown even in the Northern Territory. Although they didn't know this young man's position within the Calvin family, he was not someone they, as ordinary soldiers, could afford to be disrespectful. One soldier turned and went into the city to report. A moment later, a middle-aged official hurried over. Lord Lewis, His Excellency the Duke has learned of your arrival. Please follow me into the city. Led by the official, Lewis and his entourage passed through the heavy city gates and entered Frostspear City. The streets, though wide, were riddled with potholes, a mixture of snow and mud, leaving a trail of muddy footprints in their wake. Most of the houses were built of stone and wood, rough and dilapidated, with ruins of collapsed structures visible in the snowstorm. The pedestrians were few and far between, roughly divided into two groups. One group consisted of northern soldiers in fur coats, their faces etched with weariness, their eyes bearing the cold indifference of battle. The other group consisted of civilians wrapped in coarse cloth, their expressions numb, focused only on their journey. Lewis's gaze swept over these scenes, but his heart remained unmoved. Considering the North's scarce resources and frequent warfare, maintaining the current order was already a remarkable achievement. Duke Edmund is inside, the official said, leading Lewis and his party to the governor's office. The room was not lavishly decorated, containing only a heavy table, several old bookshelves, and a dark blue military flag hanging on the wall. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged man with a jagged scar across his face, running from his left eye down to his jawline, making his already hard features even more angular. His aura was like an unyielding fortress, exuding a suffocating sense of oppression. This man was none other than Duke Edmund, the ruler of Frostspear City and the de facto controller of the northern province. A mid-ranking official knight, he scrutinized Lewis, his gaze carrying disdain. The Calvin family's lad, Lewis's expression remained unchanged, and he nodded slightly. Yes, not bad looking. Edmund's lips curled slightly, his tone laced with disdain and mockery. Compared to your illustrious elder brother, you certainly look more like a nobleman. Lewis was not surprised by his disdainful attitude. After all, this was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. Strength was the most powerful proof. It was normal for his own meager strength to be looked down upon by a renowned peak knight. So, he didn't bother with pleasantries, took out his pioneering certificate stamped with a royal seal, and said, "I'm here to register my pioneering territory." Edmund took the certificate, glanced at it casually to confirm Lewis's identity as a pioneering lord, and then pulled a map from a stack of documents on the table, spreading it out. Apart from the areas marked in red, you can choose anywhere else. Lewis looked down. It was a detailed map of the northern province. The northern province was vast and boundless, roughly half the size of Russia in his previous life. However, the map only had a dozen or so red circles, marking areas that were not selectable. There were so many places to choose from, which excited Lewis. For this pioneering plan, the Empire had issued a complete set of northern pioneer orders. One of them explicitly stipulated that all new pioneering lords must go to the governor's office to register and choose their initial pioneering land, with priority given to those who arrived first. It seemed he was one of the first pioneering lords to arrive. The other noble scions sent by their families were probably stalling for time, not wanting to arrive in the north, hoping to delay as long as possible, and didn't take the matter seriously at all. This was, in fact, great news for him. Lewis stared at the complex map, lost in thought. For the past few days, he had been sorting through the various intelligence provided by the system, all for this moment. The various pieces of information from the daily intelligence system quickly intertwined in his mind, and he constantly filtered and compared them, searching for the most suitable territory for development. In fact, he already had several ideal targets in mind. So this selection didn't take too long. He stretched out his hand, circled a location on the map, and looked up at Edmund. "This is it." Edmund looked down at the location Lewis pointed to, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes. Located in the southeastern part of the north, at the junction of the Blue Rock Rift and the Grey Moss Tundra, 75 kilometers from Frosthowl Fjord. This kid actually picked a good place at first glance. This area has a rare slightly warmer temperature in the north, allowing some cold-resistant crops to be grown in seasons other than the harsh winter. This alone makes it much better than most places in the north. Moreover, a stream nearby ensures a sufficient water supply and provides a means of fishing. More importantly, some cold iron ore veins, though extremely difficult to mine, still hold immense development potential if the right methods are found. In the perpetually frozen and resource-scarce north, this is undoubtedly one of the few rich places. The Duke looked up and re-examined the young man before him. He had initially thought him to be just an ordinary playboy nobleman, but he hadn't expected him to know how to choose a territory's location. It seemed he wasn't as simple as he appeared. Duke Edmund stared at Lewis with interest, offering a rare compliment. "A good choice." Lewis, hearing Edmund's praise, didn't show any smugness. "Thank you for the compliment, Your Grace, but I was merely trying my best to make the most appropriate judgment." Edmund admired Lewis even more, patting him on the shoulder. "If every pioneering lord had your insight, the North would be saved. He casually picked up a steel seal and stamped it heavily on Lewis's pioneering lord registration document, officially confirming Baron Lewis's sovereignty over this territory. Lewis took the document, his fingertips brushing against the steel stamp bearing the Frostalbert emblem. He appeared calm, but inwardly, fireworks were exploding. This land, chosen according to the daily intelligence system, could not be an ordinary territory. If Edmund knew its true value, he would never let it fall into the hands of others so easily, but would hold it firmly in his own grasp. Chapter 6 Red Tide Territory. Based on the location chosen by Lewis, he successfully acquired 300 square kilometers of northern land as his initial expansion territory. He named it Red Tide Territory, partly because the Calvin family sigil is crimson, partly to commemorate his homeland, which he could never return to. In Duke Edmund's eyes, this land was merely more habitable than other parts of the North. But in Lewis's eyes, with his daily intelligence system, it was practically the Vatican of the North, the home of the European emperor. First, the rivers within the territory would see schools of fish migrating to spawn every spring and autumn, ensuring a virtually guaranteed food source. Fish, high in calories and protein, could not only feed the people but also replenish the soldiers' strength. There was even a possibility of magical fish like northern crystal cod. Second, the territory possessed geothermal eruptions, practically a miracle in the north. These not only raised the temperature of the surrounding soil, allowing for the cultivation of some cold-resistant crops, but could even help people survive the harshest winters. This food, combined with the fish, was enough to feed his people, with surplus to sell. After all, food was the most expensive commodity in the north. Moreover, the geothermal eruptions had brought several small hot springs. While others shivered in the biting cold of the north, he could soak in hot springs and drink hot soup. The thought alone was exhilarating. However, what truly made his heart race was the mineral resources of this territory. Ordinary cold iron ore was nothing special. It was abundant in the north, an essential material for forging weapons and armor. But hidden on the edge of the territory was a vein of undiscovered magic marrow. Magic marrow, similar to sulfur in his previous life, was a key material for making explosives, highly sought after by alchemists. Of course, he didn't yet have the resources to mine it, and his current strength was still quite weak, making him an easy target for others. One day, he would use this to shake the world. Magic gunpowder to blow up nights, how exciting! Abundant food sources, warm geothermal energy, mineral veins, magic marrow. This place was simply a gift from heaven, seemingly unsuitable for the north. And his intuition told him that the potential of the Crimson Tide territory was far greater than this. Seeing Lewis standing there, clutching the pioneer's pass, a smile still lingering on his lips, Duke Edmund couldn't help but tease, "How about I invite you to stay for a meal?" Lewis snapped out of his euphoria, cleared his throat, and composed himself. There was one more thing he hadn't done before leaving. He gestured for his knights to bring in 2 chests. When the first chest was opened, 3 live northern crystal cod leaped into view, their silvery white scales gleaming faintly in the firelight. Duke Edmund's eyes lit up. Northern crystal cod. Even he, the governor of the north, struggled to obtain such a rare commodity, and this kid had brought 3 of them. Not only was the meat delicious, but more importantly, its bone essence could enhance a knight's physique and blood, especially beneficial for knights currently at a bottleneck. His daughter was stuck at the threshold of becoming an elite knight. With the help of these northern crystal cod, her success rate would be greatly increased. Before he could speak, Lewis smiled and said, "These 3 fish are a small gift for the Duke." Duke Edmund was slightly taken aback, then looked at the young man with a complicated expression. Such precious things, just given away like that? This kid was so generous? Even for him, such valuable resources were hard to come by, let alone give away so easily. Before the Duke could think further, Lewis opened a second box. Inside were the same 3 northern crystal cod. This time Lewis grinned. "These 3 are for trade, a cunning lad." Duke Edmund finally couldn't help but laugh, with a hint of admiration. "Tell me, what do you want?" Lewis answered without hesitation. "I need people, slaves, soldiers, craftsmen, and knights." Hearing this, Edmund was completely certain of one thing. This young man hadn't come to the north to just coast along and wait to die. He genuinely wanted to expand, to establish his own power in this harsh land. A glint of amusement flashed in Edmund's eyes. "How many do you want? The more the better, of course. I won't let His Highness the Duke suffer a loss." Lewis smiled slightly. asking for the moon. You can buy the slaves yourself at the slave market, but I can give you 50 soldiers, 150. Lewis held up one finger. Too greedy, Edmund shook his head. A maximum of 120 men. I happen to have a batch of untrained recruits. I can't give you any veterans. I'll give you 30 artisans. Any more than that, consider it charity. Lewis sighed and nodded. All right, what about knights? Preferably all full knights, Edmund scoffed. Full knights? Dream on, Lewis continued. What about apprentice knights? The Duke's fingers paused, his gaze thoughtful for a moment, before finally speaking. 10 apprentice knights and 3 full knights. They will obey your orders, but must be loyal to the north. Lewis's lips curled into a smile, and he extended his hand. Deal. Edmund glanced at him, then shook his hand with a smile. You cunning lad, don't die too quickly. After some haggling, Lewis successfully traded 6 northern crystal cod for the talent he needed most. Lewis looked at the list before him, a slight smile playing on his lips. 120 soldiers, though not rigorously trained, were at least usable men. With some training, they could form a competent garrison. 30 craftsmen, though few in number, were enough to build houses, roads, and infrastructure, laying the foundation for the Red Tide territory. 10 apprentice knights and 3 full-fledged knights significantly supplemented his cavalry. Lewis thought the deal was more successful than expected. Duke Edmund was far more generous than he had imagined. In any case, he had obtained what he needed most. After signing the territory decree, Edmund glanced at Lewis, who was still standing there, and a slight smile played on his lips. The deal is done. What are you still doing here? Waiting for my farewell feast. Lewis smiled and turned to leave. However, Edmund suddenly paused, then said meaningfully, you'd better go to the slave market and buy some slaves. Otherwise, given the current state of your territory, relying solely on refugees won't be enough. Lewis raised an eyebrow. Even without the reminder, he would have gone to check. After all, 2 talents were waiting for him at the slave market. Edmund instructed the official standing beside him, take him over there and make sure those unscrupulous merchants don't take advantage of him. Yes, sir. The official bowed slightly, then gestured for Lewis to proceed. Lewis thanked him. Thank you for your kindness, your grace. The Duke waved his hand, indicating that the guest was to leave. Chapter 7 The Slave Market. In the eastern market of Frostspear City, a biting wind howled. The air was thick with a pungent smell of animal hides, the aroma of roasting meat, and the clinking of metal. The stalls lining the streets were rudimentary, mostly just makeshift shelters propped up by a few wooden planks, with goods haphazardly displayed. Originally, this was just a small trading market where farmers and hunters occasionally came to exchange for food and daily necessities. But since the Northern Frontier Expansion Order was issued, many merchant guilds, smelling the scent of gold, flocked here like hungry wolves, transforming this small market into a bustling trading center. At the easternmost edge of the market, a rough wooden fence enclosed an open area where a group of ragged slaves stood. Most of them huddled up, heads bowed, seemingly accustomed to being someone else's commodity. Occasionally, a resentful, angry glint could be seen. But as soon as the slave traders' whips cracked 10 times in quick succession, all resistance was instantly extinguished. Although the slave market existed in a gray area within the empire, it was an open secret in the chaotic north. Whether it was a frontier lord or a smuggler, everyone knew what was most scarce here: manpower. Come and see. Young, strong laborers. Mining, logging, bricklaying, cotton picking, they're skilled at everything, harder than oxen. These are prisoners of war from the Snow Kingdom. They're not fully tamed yet, but they're cheap. Buy them, train them for a few months, and they'll be obedient. Want some smarter slaves? These can read and write, and can even help you manage the accounts. Various shouts rose and fell as slave traders skillfully marketed their goods. To them, these slaves were no different from horses or cargo. One slave trader noticed Lewis and his group, immediately flashing a fawning smile, and stepped forward, greeting them. My lords, come and see. Here are the finest laborers in the north, guaranteed to work, resistant to cold and hunger, and at an absolutely affordable price. The official accompanying Lewis frowned and reminded the slave trader, this is Baron Calvin. Think carefully before you try anything funny. Not at all. The slave trader waved his hands repeatedly, his smile growing even more enthusiastic. I'm an honest businessman, fair and square. My slaves are all hardworking and capable. They can do everything from farming and chopping wood to building houses and picking cotton. He waved his hand, signaling the slaves behind him to stand up straight. Some slaves straightened their backs reflexively, but most stood there numbly, lifeless. Look at these few, all strong and sturdy young men, incredibly strong, as strong as 2 oxen. The slave trader walked to several dark-skinned slaves and patted them on the shoulder. Don't let their thinness fool you. They eat little and work a lot. Give them food, and they'll work until dark without a sound. Speaking of which, he lowered his voice, a suggestive smile appearing on his face. Of course, if you have other interests, sir, we can also provide higher-end goods. They come from the south, have fair skin, and have all been carefully trained. We guarantee you'll be satisfied. Lewis frowned almost imperceptibly. No need. Seeing this, the slave trader immediately switched to a professional smile, nodding repeatedly. Sir, you are indeed a man of foresight. Now is the time to expand into the north. And these rough and ready serfs are the most practical business. Rest assured, the slaves here are not only hard-working but also obedient. They won't cause you any trouble. Lewis surveyed the slaves before him. Their clothes were tattered, their skin pale, and many faces etched with numbness. Although the slave traders boasted of their strength and capability, most were malnourished, some even weak in the legs, barely able to stand. However, for slaves of this caliber, their appearance was indeed quite good. His gaze slowly swept across the group, finally settling on a thin boy. The boy huddled tightly in a woman's arms, his frail body trembling like a shivering animal. But in Lewis's eyes, his status was far from that of an ordinary slave. This was the target indicated by the system, Wheel, possessing the potential of a peak knight. His timid appearance, without the intelligence system's warning, would be unimaginable to anyone that this boy might one day grow into a peak knight, a figure capable of influencing a war. On the other side, in a corner of the slave group, a man even thinner than the others lowered his head, his body slightly hunched, as if trying to disappear completely into the crowd. His face was hidden behind disheveled gray hair, his gaze shifting, deliberately avoiding the gaze of those around him. He looked utterly unremarkable, even more humble than the other slaves. An ordinary person would only see him as a pitiful creature, tortured to the point of near collapse. But Lewis knew this was none other than Hilco, the alchemy apprentice who had fled to the north after being hunted for theft. Seeing Lewis's interest, the slave trader quickly patted his chest and assured him, "My lord, if you buy him, I guarantee you won't be disappointed." Lewis didn't rush to a decision but asked, "How much is a slave?" 8 silver coins for a man, 4 silver coins for a woman and child, the slave trader said with a smile. Lewis nodded. The prices of these slaves weren't low, but they weren't outrageous either. It seemed the slave trader was wary of the official beside him and dared not go too far. "How many people do you have here in total?" "There are over 380 here. If you need more, my lord, I can get more from outside, that's all." Lewis decisively gave the order. He then went to several other slave traders and purchased 120 more slaves. He eventually gathered 500 slaves, spending a total of 380 gold coins. This single transaction shrank his assets by nearly half. Currency settings. 10 iron coins equals 1 copper coin, 10 copper coins equals 1 silver coin, 10 silver coins equals 1 gold coin. Next, Lewis purchased large quantities of grain, seeds, farming tools, weapons, and other necessities for expanding his territory. Prices in the north were at least twice as high as in the south, further straining his finances. After all the purchases were complete, he tallied his remaining assets and found only 68 gold coins. He was broke. During his 2 days in Prosperous City, Lewis not only busied himself with purchasing supplies but also encountered several noble lords who had also been sent to expand the territory. After a brief encounter, he lost interest in these so-called nobles. Some spent their days drunk in taverns, escaping reality. Others looked ashen-faced, constantly gloomy and filled with despair for the future. In front of Lewis, they cursed the emperor's incompetence, denounced their parents' heartlessness, and wished they could flee back to the south immediately. Lewis merely smiled non-committally and ignored them. 2 days later, outside the gates of Prosperous City, a force of nearly 1,000 men was ready to depart. Lewis mounted his horse and gazed into the distance. That lay Crimson Tide territory, his own territory. Depart. With a command, the mighty army embarked on their journey, heading towards Crimson Tide territory in the southeast of the northern border. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8: The Ice Wolf Attack. A row of simple pots sat atop burning firewood, the air filled with a faint aroma of wheat porridge. The slaves lined up, holding rough wooden bowls, waiting for their share. Their eyes were filled with gratitude. In the past, they had struggled with hunger every day, fighting over even the smallest scraps. Now, to have hot porridge was a tremendous blessing. Lord Lewis's kindness was boundless. Standing behind the stove, George ladled porridge with a large wooden ladle, muttering worriedly, "My lord, if you keep cooking like this, there might not be enough food. What if the shortage gets too big one day?" Before he could finish, Lewis casually waved him off. "People eat when they're hungry. Just cook what I tell you to cook." "Why all the fuss?" George opened his mouth, but ultimately sighed and resignedly continued ladling porridge. His new master was good in every way, except for being too generous, completely disregarding the value of food. HMPH, at this rate, I'm afraid I'll be back in the slave market in less than 6 months, George lamented. Since that's the case, he'd better sneak in a couple more bowls of porridge now, otherwise he might go hungry someday. Lewis, however, was completely unconcerned. He wasn't worried about food shortages. The Red Tide territory was so rich in resources, he wouldn't starve. This was the confidence his cheat ability gave him. Just then, the daily intelligence update came in. 1. Baron Hayes, the pioneer, froze to death after excessive drinking on his way to his territory. 2. Emily Edmund, the youngest daughter of the governor of the North, broke through to the level of a low-ranking elite knight. 3. A pack of 70 hungry direwolves, following the scent of grain, ambushed the caravan in the canyon ahead. The first two were insignificant to Lewis. At most, he felt a pang of sadness at Baron Hayes' death. But the third intelligence report made his expression grave. 70 direwolves were not something he feared even with his current forces, but a careless attack by these ferocious beasts would be a disastrous loss. He immediately summoned Captain Lambert and ordered in a deep voice, "Send the knights in groups of 5 to scout the area around the canyon for any unusual activity." Lambert nodded without hesitation. The knights quickly divided into groups and galloped towards the canyon. The cold wind howled, and a chilling atmosphere permeated the canyon. The night squad advanced slowly along the snow-covered ground, the air thick with an unpleasant stench. It smelled like rotting flesh mixed with the odor of wild beasts, making one instinctively frown. Lambert dismounted, squatted on the snow, and brushed away the thin layer to reveal messy paw prints. The marks were deep, indicating that these wolves were extremely hungry and had no patience to conceal their tracks. He looked up, his expression grave. "Something's up." They quickly returned to Lewis and reported their findings in detail. Lewis, after listening, showed no sign of panic. "Very well, since they've come looking for us, let them see who the prey is." He immediately ordered traps to be set in the canyon to lure the wolves into their trap. Hungry dire wolves lay prone in the snow, their eerie green eyes fixed on the distant convoy. Their thick, coarse fur, a color between gray and dark blue, blended seamlessly with the snow, making them easier to conceal in the cold wasteland. Hunger made them appear even thinner. But the terrifying explosive power hidden beneath their bones was still evident. The wind carried an alluring scent, the prey they had been dreaming of. "Ow!" the alpha wolf howled. Dozens of dark figures instantly rose from the snow, moving silently like ghosts, gradually approaching the convoy. Closer and closer, closer and closer. Bang! A muffled explosion tore through the night. The massive wooden stake trap sprang up, sharp spears piercing the foremost wolves, blood instantly staining the snow red. The wolves, startled by the sudden trap, scattered and fled. Soldiers lying in ambush on the perimeter quickly drew their bows, arrows raining down like a storm. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the sound of arrows piercing the air tore through the air. The dire wolves, unable to dodge in time, howled in agony. Several wolves were accurately shot through the throat, rolling and collapsing on the snow, blood quickly staining the white snow red. "Now attack!" Lambert's longsword drew a silver arc through the air. The knights launched a simultaneous surprise attack, their ferocious battle aura instantly igniting the battlefield. A knight leaped up, his spear glowing red, piercing a charging dire wolf. The explosive energy pinned the wolf's carcass to the snow, creating a huge crack. Another knight wielded a greatsword, its blade wreathed in crimson flames of battle aura. He leaped high, bringing his sword down in a single strike, the flames cleaving the knight in two, severing a giant wolf attempting a sneak attack in two. Warm blood bloomed like crimson flowers on the snow. The wolves' wild instincts could no longer suppress their fear, and they scattered in all directions. Close the net. The knights adjusted their formation, surrounding the wolves. They unleashed their battle aura, each strike claiming a wolf's life. With the sound of swords slicing through flesh, the wolves were utterly slaughtered amidst their screams. Only the Wolf King remained, standing alone on the blood-stained snowfield, its thick fur soaked in blood. Its eerie green eyes stared intently at Lambert, revealing its final, ferocious expression. "Ow!" the Wolf King roared, its massive body lunging at Lambert, its claws whipping up a chilling gust of wind powerful enough to tear through steel. Lambert merely dodged to the side, his battle aura instantly coating his longsword, the red light surging. Slash! With a low shout, the sword light struck like lightning, severing the Wolf King's head from its body. Hot blood splattered, and the wolf's corpse crashed to the ground. The battle ended faster than expected, the knights suffered almost no losses. The ground was littered with the corpses of dire wolves, the blood-red snow a testament to the battle's brutality. Lambert, not even out of breath, turned to look at Lewis, who was riding towards them from afar. "My lord, the wolf pack is wiped out." The knights quickly tallied their spoils, 70 dire wolves, all dead. The spoils were also considerable, 70 thick wolf pelts, sharp wolf teeth, and most importantly, a small mountain of wolf meat. Lewis looked at the spoils and nodded in satisfaction. "Not bad. Skin the wolves and distribute the meat to the brothers as an extra meal." The soldiers cheered immediately. In the cold north, being able to eat a hot meal of meat was a dream come true. Besides, wolf meat wasn't inedible. If prepared properly, it could taste just as good as ordinary wild animal meat. "Our lord is so generous." At this moment, the new soldiers' gazes towards Lewis had changed from simple obedience to heartfelt approval. Chapter 9 Arrival. After dozens of days of trekking, Lewis finally led his caravan to Red Tide territory. However, what greeted their eyes was a lifeless wasteland. "What a desolate backwater," a knight from the south muttered, gazing at the scene before him. Lewis didn't reply, but dismounted and slowly surveyed his surroundings. Barren, dilapidated, and devoid of life, the entire land was deathly still, even weeds were scarce, truly a desolate place. But Lewis, with his intelligence network, was certain this land held immense potential, possessing abundant resources, geothermal energy, mineral deposits, fisheries, and vast tracts of arable land. If someone was willing to develop it, it would undoubtedly become a land of wealth. "This place will eventually become the richest territory in the north," Lewis murmured, as if promising himself. Without wasting any time, Lewis issued the orders for expansion. "Set up temporary tents first, then start building houses once we've confirmed the location. We can start by felling trees, find a water source by the river to ensure everyone has enough drinking water and food supplies, clear a clearing and set up a simple training ground. The soldiers can't neglect their training." With each order issued, the soldiers and slaves sprang into action. The sounds of felling trees and shouts rose and fell, beginning to echo across this long silent land, injecting its first glimmer of life. As the new lord of Red Tide territory, Lewis needed to personally assess the state of the land before formulating his next expansion plan. So, he spent the next few days carefully inspecting Red Tide territory. When Lewis arrived at the southern part of the territory, he noticed that steam was slowly rising from some areas where the snow had melted. He quickly stepped forward, squatted down, and felt a warmth in his palm. A geothermal vent. Lewis's eyes flashed with surprise. The intelligence system had indicated the presence of geothermal resources here, and it was indeed true. In the environment of the north, the existence of geothermal energy was undoubtedly an extremely valuable asset. If developed properly, it could not only provide warmth for the residents but also facilitate the upcoming spring planting. Even more surprisingly, he discovered several hot springs nearby. Hot springs in the north. The combination of these two words felt almost unbelievable. Imagining himself soaking in hot springs amidst the snow and ice while other lords shivered in the cold wind, Lewis couldn't help but smile. The feeling was doubly joyful. So he decided to locate his manor near these hot springs. Next, he went to the riverbank. The ice had begun to crack, and the water flowed slowly. Several birds perched on the bank, occasionally swooping down to snatch small, still dormant fish. The fish population wasn't large yet, but according to intelligence, once spring arrived, this place would become a breeding ground for fish, providing a stable food source for the territory. Just as he was pondering how to maximize the use of this resource, a scouting party Lewis had dispatched rushed back, bringing exciting intelligence. They had discovered rich mineral deposits deep in the mountains. "My lord, we've discovered a vein of cold iron ore deep within the mountains to the northwest, and even deeper, we found ore emitting a dark red glow, suspected to be magic marrow ore," Lambert gasped. "Magic marrow ore? If it's true, that's a gold mine." Lewis nodded calmly. He already knew of the vein's existence through the intelligence system, so he wasn't too surprised. The value of magic marrow ore was self-evident, but under current conditions, mining it was far too difficult. However, as long as this land could develop steadily, this vein would one day become the most important asset of the Crimson Tide territory. After this round trip, Lewis and his knights' confidence in this territory increased considerably. The intelligence system was correct. This was indeed a land full of hope. However, compared to the potential value of this land, the reality before them was extremely harsh. When they stepped into the indigenous settlement, they were greeted by a scene of utter desolation. Stagnant water and rotting mud mingled on the ground, and a damp, decaying stench permeated the air. The dilapidated wooden huts and mud brick houses stood crookedly, seemingly on the verge of collapse. The inhabitants were mostly ragged elderly people, women, and children. They were thin, wrapped in clothes pieced together from old strips of cloth, which clearly offered little protection from the northern chill. Was this place ever managed before? Lewis frowned, looking at the scene before him. "The former administrator ran away long ago," a native replied. Several small, thin children huddled behind a door, their cheeks red from the cold, their frail bodies hidden in the shadows, observing Lewis and his group. Their eyes were timid, filled with wariness and fear of strangers. Lewis felt a pang of sympathy watching this scene. Having received compulsory education himself, he couldn't bear to see children suffer like this. He dismounted, took some dry rations from his pocket, knelt down, and offered the food. "Here, eat." The children merely stared at him warily, none daring to move, as if afraid it was some kind of trap. But the aroma of the dried rations was incredibly enticing, and the children swallowed hard. "Eat," Lewis said softly. The children finally couldn't resist, grabbing the food from Lewis's hand and wolfing it down, as if afraid it would disappear in the next second. But Lewis quickly noticed that a little boy didn't immediately devour his food like the others. Instead, he quietly hid his portion inside his tattered clothes. "Why aren't you eating?" Lewis squatted down and asked. The little boy looked up, his dirty face showing fear. He answered timidly in his childish voice, I want to save it for my mother." Lewis was stunned. He suddenly remembered that the nobles in the south fed their dogs the finest meat. And here, the children had to carefully hide even a single piece of dried ration. It was absurd. He suddenly felt a sense of responsibility, a desire to do something for the people of this land. Lewis surveyed the surrounding, starving and freezing natives and announced loudly, "Anyone willing to work can come to my camp. I will give you food, shelter, and help you survive." The natives looked at each other, their eyes numb. They had endured too much suffering and no longer trusted anyone, but looking at these children who had just received their share of food, they finally nodded. "Let's give it a try. Things couldn't get any worse." Chapter 10 Building a House. Lewis stood on a slightly higher hillside, overlooking the desolate land. The spot he was looking at was the initial settlement he had chosen for the Red Tide territory, the future central town. It was close to a geothermal vent, meaning the temperature would be relatively high, preventing anyone from freezing to death in the middle of the night. The hillside blocked the biting winds, providing just the right amount of shelter for the newly arrived inhabitants. "My lord, shall we begin construction of the castle?" asked Mike, standing beside him. Mike was the most experienced craftsman Lewis had acquired from Duke Edmund. Lewis had appointed him as the Red Tide Territory's construction officer. "The castle isn't urgent," Lewis shook his head. "Let's build the residential area first, then where will you live?" "I'll live with the others for now." "You're going to live with us?" The old craftsman was taken aback. "What, are you worried I won't be comfortable?" Lewis shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "We're in the north now, what's the fuss?" The old craftsman immediately looked at this young lord with newfound respect. So, after discussions between Lewis and the old craftsman, a semi-subterranean communal dwelling was chosen as the initial housing for the Red Tide territory. It combined the common dwellings of the northern regions of this world with the Viking longhouses Lewis had seen in his previous life's books. These houses were dug a third of the way below ground level, effectively insulating the area. The walls were supported by a wooden frame, woven with willow branches, and finally reinforced with mud and straw plaster, providing both wind and moisture protection. Most importantly, construction was incredibly fast. Mike was filled with admiration for Lewis after their brief conversation. This young lord had designed such a suitable building for the northern regions in such a short time. He was practically an architectural genius. Construction began immediately after the design was completed. 20 men were divided into groups, each led by 2 soldiers and 18 slaves or refugees, working efficiently with clear division of labor. The cold wind howled, and the slaves, necks hunched, gripped their simple shovels, pounding them hard into the frozen ground. Thump! The shovels vibrated until their wrists went numb, but the soil finally loosened a little. Don't just stand there, keep going, the soldiers urged. Just as they were sweating profusely, a figure entered the pit. It was Lewis. He rolled up his sleeves, picked up a shovel, and bent down to dig a few times. The Lord is going to do the work himself, the soldiers asked in surprise. This work is indeed not easy. Everyone has worked hard. Dinner time is almost here, you can rest for a while, Lewis said thoughtfully after digging for more than 10 minutes. Then he turned and went to the next construction site to continue his journey of working alongside the people. Some soldiers were initially dissatisfied, feeling that they were supposed to be in a combat unit, yet they were sent to build houses and do hard labor. But now that even the Lord was personally involved, what could they complain about? The slaves felt the same way. Many of them struggled to even have enough to eat. Now, they not only had food but also a stable place to live. This was an immense blessing. During breaks in construction, Lewis would occasionally pass by a construction site. Do a couple of quick pulls, leave a few words of encouragement, clap his hands, and leave. This framework is doing well, we can finally get a good night's sleep. Apply a thicker layer of mud, don't slack off, or you'll freeze. Is this almost finished? Bring some hot soup later, we can rest after this batch. Wherever Lewis went, the enthusiasm increased. With ample food supplies, the soldiers stopped complaining. The slaves also worked like mad, their morale at its peak, and the construction speed of the entire territory was astonishing. In just a few days, the first batch of semi-subterranean communal dwellings rose from the ground. Like mounds rising from the earth, thick mud and sod covered the roofs, blending seamlessly with the snowfield. Most of the houses were buried underground, the log frames sturdy and heavy, the outer walls woven from willow branches and sealed with rammed earth, saving timber and insulating against the cold. Moreover, the entire settlement was built around a geothermal vent, dissipating most of the cold. Although it looks simple, it was arguably one of the best living environments in the north. With the completion of the first batch of semi-subterranean dwellings, the Crimson Tide territory finally established a true foothold in this frigid northern land. Of course, houses alone were not enough, the hearts of the people were paramount. To inspire his subjects and further solidify his image as a benevolent and wise lord, Lewis decided to hold a grand celebration. He wanted everyone to understand that following him, Lewis, would not be a loss. As night fell, a huge bonfire was lit in the open space in front of the Crimson Tide territory, dispelling the northern chill. This once barren, frozen wasteland was now bustling with activity for the first time because of the celebration. Nearly 1,000 subjects gathered around the firelight. They were of different backgrounds, slaves bought from slave traders, natives of the north, refugees taken in along the way, and soldiers and knights who had followed Lewis. But at this moment, they all shared one thing in common. They were all subjects of the Crimson Tide territory. All eyes turned to the high rock before the bonfire. There stood their lord, Lewis Calvin. The young pioneering baron, draped in a long black cloak, his face flickering in the firelight, left everyone wondering what he was about to do. Once everyone was present, Lewis spoke. Today is the first celebration of Red Tide territory. To celebrate the completion of the first batch of houses in Red Tide territory. With houses, this land will become your home, and you will become the true masters of Red Tide territory. However, the crowd below remained unresponsive. They simply exchanged bewildered glances, some even at a loss. What did it mean to become masters? These slaves, refugees, and laborers had never imagined themselves as masters of any land. They knew only labor, only obedience. Even the courage to rebel had been worn down by long years of suffering. They initially thought this celebration was some kind of oath-taking ceremony for the new lord, or some kind of intimidation. Lewis had anticipated this reaction, but it didn't matter. He would show them what hope was through his actions. Next, Lewis scanned the crowd. "I will reward those who are the most diligent and loyal." With a gesture of his hand, his steward, Hilco, immediately opened the parchment scroll behind him and began reading a series of names. Hark, Morgan, Sharna, the slaves whose names were called shrank back, their faces filled with fear. In the past understanding, being called by the Lord usually meant punishment, or even death. Some began to tremble, some lowered their heads, and some even wanted to kneel down and beg for mercy. They had no idea how their fate was about to change. Chapter 11 The Great Master. The slaves whose names were called hesitated as they stepped forward, their hearts filled with unease. Lewis waited until they were in place before slowly speaking. "In the past, you have made tremendous efforts for the construction of the Red Tide territory. So today I will give you the reward you deserve." Without further ado, Lewis took the slave contracts from Hilco and tossed them into the campfire. The flames engulfed the word, signifying their slave status. "From this day forward, you are no longer slaves, but free citizens." Everyone froze, even their breath caught in their throats. Free, the slaves looked at each other in disbelief, their eyes filled with shock, as if they couldn't believe their own eyes and ears. The next second, the crowd erupted. "Free citizens! We are free citizens, great Lord, oh God, free citizens! I am a free citizen." A middle-aged slave with a weathered face suddenly collapsed to the ground, his forehead repeatedly striking the hard frozen earth, continuing even as blood seeped out. His voice, hoarse and broken with overwhelming emotion, cried out, "Great Lord! Benefactor, great Lord! You are the savior sent by the gods." A young female slave wept, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. An elderly slave tremblingly raised his hands, murmuring something as if praying to the dragon ancestor, or offering Lewis his most sincere gratitude. The other slaves around him stared wide-eyed in shock at those kneeling on the ground. They were filled with regret, wondering why they hadn't tried harder. Perhaps they would be free citizens by now. Once the scene quieted down a bit, Lewis dropped an even bigger bombshell. "From today onward, every month more than 10 slaves who contribute to the Red Tide territory will become free citizens. As long as you are willing to work hard and contribute to the Red Tide territory, each of you has the opportunity to become a free citizen, even to own your own land." All the slaves stared at Lewis in disbelief. If the previous group of freed people had given them a glimmer of hope, then Lewis had now given them a true future. As slaves, they were merely Lewis's property, their life and death decided at his whim. And their descendants would remain slaves, generation after generation, unable to escape. But now Lewis was telling them that with hard work, they had a chance to escape slavery and become truly free. For them, this meant stepping from hell into the human world. Several clever slaves knelt, shouting, "Great Master!" Soon, more followed, their voices rising and falling, sweeping across the entire square like a tidal wave. Their voices were hoarse and trembling, filled with uncontrollable fervor. "Great Master! Great Master!" Their shouts grew louder and more unified, finally coalescing into a deafening chorus. It was a cry bursting from the depths of their souls, echoing in the night sky, lingering for a long time. "Great Master!" The knights watching this scene exchanged bewildered glances. Although they had witnessed many of their lord's miracles, this scene still left them utterly shocked. One man, with a few words, had transformed a group of slaves from numb, lifeless corpses into fanatical believers. Some of the younger knights were even somewhat bewildered. Why did these lowly slaves look at Lewis with eyes that seemed to worship a god? Lewis, standing on the high rock, was filled with emotion. A mere verbal promise could have such power. As his successor, he naturally did not approve of slavery. Slavery should certainly be abolished, but it had to be done gradually. If complete freedom were granted all at once, he feared it would cause chaos. Using a reward system to gradually liberate the slaves would keep them motivated and allow the entire Red Tide territory to develop rapidly. In fact, in the Red Tide territory, the difference in status between slaves and free citizens wasn't that great. All the harvests of the free citizens would eventually have to be handed over to Lewis for unified distribution. It was just that differentiating between the two classes, with room for upward mobility, would make it easier to motivate them. "Of course, you won't be left out either," Lewis said, turning his gaze to the soldiers and knights standing in the outer circle. He waved his hand, and his attendants immediately and swiftly opened several heavy wooden chests. The light of the campfire illuminated the thick leather armor and warm boots neatly arranged inside the chests. At that moment, Almost every soldier's gaze was fixed on the supplies in the crates. Every soldier will receive a set of animal hide armor and a pair of northern leather boots. Knights will each receive an additional complete wolf pelt as armor padding. As soon as the words were spoken, the soldiers rushed towards the crates. This was the north, where cold and poverty made resources extremely scarce. Many soldiers still wore worn-out boots, their feet often numb with cold while patrolling in the snow. A new pair of boots and new leather armor was something they had always dreamed of. The attendants distributed the thick leather armor to the soldiers. My God! It's real leather armor, these boots, these are the best leather boots in the north. Lord, are you serious? They excitedly received the equipment, their eyes filled with excitement and their hearts with gratitude. Standing on the high rock, Lewis watched the soldiers below, who were so excited they were practically beside themselves, and a slight smile appeared on his lips. These armor and boots were things he had purchased in advance in Frostspear City, originally intended to equip the soldiers. In the north, all resources are scarce. Even the smallest favor is enough to make someone devoted to you. Moreover, these rewards were obtained by Lewis from the intelligence system. They were exactly what they needed right now. It was like striking a nerve. How could they not be incredibly grateful? After distributing the items, the feast continued, and several golden brown roasted carp were brought out. Hot juices dripped into the flames, sizzling softly. The rich aroma of meat filled the air, tantalizing everyone's taste buds. Everyone received a piece, even the lowest-ranking slaves were fairly given a share. The first bite of the delicious roast meat brought tears to many eyes, the long-lost warmth and satisfaction. It's so delicious, I haven't eaten real meat in years. Laughter echoed across the open space as people danced around the campfire. A northern refugee excitedly played a bone flute, and several native women held hands, twirling and leaping. The soldiers, not to be outdone, joined in the singing, even laughing and competing in dance moves around the campfire. Groups of children ran about in the clearing, their faces beaming with pure joy. And atop the highest boulder, Lewis silently surveyed the scene. As their lord, these people had placed their hopes on him. He had to lead them to survive, and even prosper, on this cold land. Chapter 12 The Miserable Hilco. Hilco had been incredibly busy lately, barely having time to catch his breath. All because Lewis casually remarked, "Go register the basic information of the residents of the Red Tide territory and see what each of them is good at." So he was thrown into a pile of messy handwritten files, staring blankly at a group of bewildered farmers and blacksmiths. Some stammered, completely unsure how to answer. "I used to farm. Do you still want to farm? I don't know." Others simply answered nonchalantly, "Good at living." Hilco almost slapped the record book in that person's face. Damn it, how did I, a future alchemist, end up as a steward for a border lord? Hilco cursed under his breath as he frantically copied name after name into the book. He could only blame his own impulsiveness for stealing alchemical formulas. He was originally just an alchemy apprentice who stole some of his mentor's magic crystals to make a living, enjoying a life of luxury in the Emerald Federation. One day, he encountered a mysterious man on the black market who offered a hefty sum to steal his mentor's alchemical secrets. The price was so high it tempted him. Hilco didn't hesitate long. After all, the offer was enough to free him from his apprenticeship and allow him to open his own alchemy workshop. However, the plan didn't go as smoothly as he imagined. The formula was far too profound for him to remember, so he simply took the whole thing. He figured his mentor was forgetful and wouldn't notice if a single part was missing. However, he underestimated the formula's importance. His mentor quickly discovered the missing formula, and the Golden Marrow Guild issued a warrant for his arrest, determined to bring the thief to justice. The black market buyer was quickly apprehended and confessed. Hilco knew that if caught, he would face severe punishment and might even be sent to a laboratory to become a guinea pig for various strange alchemical experiments. So, to escape, he cleverly disguised himself as a slave, blending in with the slave traders' transports, hoping to slip out of the Emerald Federation and find another opportunity to escape. These slave traders were far more cunning than he'd imagined. The moment he tried to make a move, he was met with a brutal beating with a long whip, leaving him no chance to resist. A few lashes of 10 were enough to subdue him. And so he truly became an ordinary slave, daring not to reveal his identity as an alchemy apprentice. If these slave traders found out, they would gladly resell him back to the Gold Marrow Guild, whereupon Hilco would be sent straight to the experimental table. And so, after much wandering, he was brought to the Frostspear City black market. He thought he'd be sold to the mines for life. But instead, he was bought by a young pioneering lord named Lewis and brought to this god-forsaken territory. Initially, Hilco felt he'd escaped purgatory only to stumble into another abyss, destined to be enslaved until death. However, Lewis didn't treat slaves like livestock, as other nobles did. Instead, upon learning he could write and do accounting, he freed him from slavery, making him a steward's assistant. During his time with Lewis, he discovered one thing: Lewis was a good man. He would share his food with the starving slaves and personally tear up their slave contracts, granting them their freedom. A nobleman, actually treating slaves as human beings? In Hilco's eyes, this was less like a proper lord and more like a religious follower. Tisk, I guess I'm lucky this time, Hilco said, but in his heart, he was already plotting his escape. After all, how could a future great alchemist spend his life in this god-forsaken place? My lord, this is the survey of the people you asked me to do. Hilco placed a thick booklet on Lewis's desk. He looked weary, his steps unsteady. Thank you for your hard work. Lewis took the booklet and flipped through it casually. The handwriting wasn't neat, but it was well organized and meticulously categorized. Even the old people who could barely lift a hoe, the women who could weave, and even the children skilled in hunting were marked. Clearly, it had taken considerable effort to organize. Quite talented. Lewis looked up at the young man before him. Hilco stood slouching, his eyes dark with prominent circles. He knew, of course, that Hilco was no ordinary person. After all, his daily intelligence system wasn't just for show. He'd known since buying Hilco that the kid was an alchemy apprentice from the Emerald Federation's Gold Marrow Guild, and also a criminal. However, he hadn't exposed him. Firstly, Hilco didn't seem malicious. Lewis wasn't in a hurry to reveal his true intentions, wanting to see when he'd be willing to speak up. Secondly, given the current state of the Crimson Tide territory, a literate assistant with administrative skills was more useful than an alchemy apprentice. The territory was still in its early stages of development, let alone alchemy. Even basic infrastructure was lacking. The most important thing right now was to ensure the land functioned properly, not to conduct alchemical experiments. What if he exposed him and the guy just slacked off and refused to do any work? Lewis glanced at the mountain of documents and ledgers behind him. If he lost Hilco, he, the new lord, would probably have to sight among this junk and study the documents himself. Thinking this, Lewis decided to continue playing dumb. Anyway, this was the middle of nowhere, the other guy couldn't escape. Setting aside the matter of Hilco for the moment, Lewis opened his survey book and quickly scanned the basic information about the people in his territory. Seeing the results, he couldn't help but smile slightly. Although Red Tide territory appeared to be a desolate and barbaric land, its population was actually far richer than Lewis had imagined. With a population of over 1,000, the majority were farmers and herders, with over 100 experienced fishermen. There were also several dozen hunters, blacksmiths, carpenters, and leather workers, enough to build a basic self-sufficient territory. This was exactly the information Lewis needed. He had sent Hilco to investigate the population not merely for record-keeping, but to understand the intricacies of the territory. A territory is like a sophisticated machine. Every gear must be in the correct position to operate efficiently. If you randomly assign a farmer to blacksmithing, a fisherman to dig ditches, or a hunter to herd sheep, it might function, but it would be slow. A lord who doesn't understand his people cannot control the future of this land. Therefore, the next step was to rationally allocate these people and get Red Tide territory back on track as quickly as possible. Chapter 13 Planning. Lewis pressed his hand to his head, the information about the territory swirling in his mind. He began to formulate a future industrial plan for the Red Tide territory based on the existing information. After all, it was unrealistic to rely solely on the intelligence system and wait for opportunities to fall from the sky to support nearly 1,000 people. The Red Tide territory needed some stable industries. When the information was fully processed in his mind, he looked up at Hilco. I'll tell you, you write it down. Hilco forced himself to stay awake and nodded subconsciously. Have these 100 fishermen go to the riverbank immediately. Lewis pointed to the winding river on the map with his pen. First, build a temporary dock and prepare the fishing boats in advance to prepare for the restoration of the fishing industry. Although there aren't many fish now, once the water temperature rises, large schools of fish will flow upstream to spawn. At that time, the catch will become one of the most important food sources for the Red Tide territory. In the future, We should also consider establishing aquaculture areas along the river. If we can successfully cultivate fish adapted to cold waters, we can develop our own aquaculture industry instead of relying solely on wild fishing. Okay, Hilko wrote down the key points the Lord had mentioned, one by one. Besides fishing, agriculture and animal husbandry are equally important. We currently have over 400 farmers, and the focus is on land reclamation. Lewis drew a line on the map indicating a hot but cold region. Hot spring water can be used to thaw the land, and we should prepare an irrigation system in advance. The soil here isn't very fertile, but if we utilize the geothermal area as well, it won't be much worse. The first crops will be rye and potatoes. These crops are cold resistant and can grow in this land. Okay, as for animal husbandry, Lewis paused, thinking about the livestock in the territory. The number of livestock in the territory is currently too small. The existing cattle, sheep, and reindeer are simply not enough to support large-scale farming. I will arrange for someone to go to Prosperous City to purchase more livestock, and at the same time, establish a dedicated livestock district to develop animal husbandry. Okay, Hilko nodded again, though tired, carefully recording each instruction. Then, Lewis drew a circle on the map indicating the Red Tide Territory forest area. We have over 50 experienced hunters who, besides their daily hunts, can also scout the surrounding forest, keep magical beasts away and prevent any unknown forces from infiltrating. Finally, there are the craftsmen brought from Prosperous City. Leatherworkers will prioritize winter clothing, blacksmiths will forge farm tools, and carpenters will build houses. We can also establish a workshop to bring all the craftsmen together, allowing them to collaborate and recruit apprentices, forming a complete production chain. Lewis spoke quickly, each sentence sounding like a decision he had rehearsed countless times in his mind. Hilko initially didn't have much affection for the title of Lord. His impression of nobles was that they were hypocritical, arrogant, and full of empty rhetoric, yet treated their subjects like livestock. Lewis's initial impression of him was merely that of a kind-hearted man. But now he was beginning to change his mind. This lord not only had a kind heart, but also knew how to utilize the resources at his disposal. This guy was quite capable. Hilko felt a surge of admiration. And so, Lewis executed the plan step by step, and the Crimson Tide territory officially began operating. The campfire illuminated the busy figures of the people, wisps of smoke rose, hunters prepared for their hunt, fishermen began repairing their boats, and the sound of craftsmen's hammers echoed in the air. This land, dormant for so long, slowly awakened under Lewis's guidance. Spring quietly arrived, but most of the north remained covered in snow, uncultivable. However, the land beneath Lewis's feet was different. The soil was soft and moist, carrying the unique life force of spring. This was thanks to Lewis's order a week earlier to channel hot spring water into the fields, using geothermal heat to melt the frozen soil. Now, the land, frozen all winter, had finally softened, and the previously unsuitable wasteland was gradually bursting with life. Is this really the land of the north? A farmer grabbed a handful of soil, feeling its warm moisture, and couldn't help but exclaim. Those around him, hearing this, also bent down to touch it, their faces filled with surprise. The hot water really thawed the frozen soil. In the north, crops can be planted in early spring. Excited discussions rose and fell across the fields. Of course, using hot spring water to thaw the frozen soil is only a temporary solution. The hot spring water has a high salt content, and repeated use might turn the land into unusable saline alkali land. Greenhouse cultivation will have to be implemented when conditions are right. Standing beside Lewis was a middle-aged man whose clothes were covered in mud and hay. His name was Mick, the agricultural officer of the Red Tide Territory. Mick was originally just one of the slaves, unknown and taciturn. If it weren't for the daily intelligence system, Lewis probably would never have noticed that among a group of slaves, there was a slave skilled in farming. He had an exceptional talent for farming, even possessing an almost instinctive intuition about soil, crops, and climate. When Lewis found Mick, announced his release from slavery, and appointed him as the agricultural officer of the Red Tide Territory, Mick couldn't believe his ears. This was something he had never even dreamed of. He was tongue-tied and didn't know how to express his gratitude, so he silently buried himself in the fields, giving his all. Today was the day for plowing and applying base fertilizer in the Red Tide Territory. Mick scooped up a handful of damp soil, gently crushed it between his fingertips, and smiled with satisfaction. He looked up at Lewis, wiping his rough hands on the hem of his clothes. "My lord, Everything is ready. In that case, let's begin, Lewis nodded. Everyone, plow, Mick shouted. The order was quickly carried out, and hundreds of farmers bent down, plunging their iron plows deep into the soil. So soft, this soil is even warm. The softening of the soil surprised many farmers who had worked in the north. And all of this was thanks to Lewis's ingenious idea. The people's admiration for Lewis increased again. Watching the farmers diligently working the land, Lewis asked, "Is the fertilizer ready?" "It's been ready for a long time," Mick waved his hand. A dozen wooden carts slowly drove into the fields, piled high with dark fertilizer, emitting a strong and pungent smell. This was a special base fertilizer that Lewis had ordered to be collected and made as soon as he arrived in the territory. It was a mixture of human and animal excrement, straw, fish entrails, and clods of earth, an alchemical creation. The excrement and straw provided basic nutrients, while the fish entrails were rich in organic matter. The clods of earth not only greatly improved fertility but also effectively prevented pest infestation, providing a better growing environment for the seeds after sowing. The strong smell of the fertilizer permeated the air, making people's noses sting. Some frowned, but no one complained. Even Lord Lewis showed no sign of disgust. After all, they all knew that only this fertilizer could bring a better harvest. The farmers methodically spread the fertilizer into the tilled soil, then mixed it evenly with hose, allowing the nutrients to fully penetrate. "We can sow in 4 days," Mick said, stamping his foot on the soil with a satisfied expression. Lewis stood for a while, confirming everything was in order, then turned and left. It wasn't that he disliked the pungent smell of the fertilizer, but rather that his daily intelligence system had updated with 3 useful pieces of information that required his attention. Chapter 14 New Intelligence. Lewis's eyes flickered slightly as he stared at the 3 pieces of information that appeared on the daily intelligence system. 1. The chieftain of the Frost Moon tribe has been poisoned, plunging the tribe into civil war. 2. A pack of ice wolves, mostly cubs, is at the Azure Rock Rift. 3. 4 days later, Jack will be selling cranberry seeds in Frost Spear City, among which a dozen or so frostblood crimson berry seeds have been mixed in. Lewis raised an eyebrow. Normally, the system's intelligence reports were often mixed with a lot of irrelevant, trivial information. But today, all 3 pieces of intelligence were valuable. The Frost Moon tribe? Lewis recalled the intelligence about this northern barbarian tribe. The Frost Moon tribe had always been one of the most powerful forces in the north, renowned for its bloodthirsty berserkers and archers. They had repeatedly harassed the northern provinces of the Ironblood Empire, earning Duke Edmund's deep resentment. Now that their chieftain had been poisoned, the tribe was bound to fall into chaos, and if the turmoil continued, it might even split apart. For the entire north, this might be the harbinger of an impending storm. But for Lewis now, this matter was beyond his reach. After all, he was just a small fry, not yet capable of influencing the fate of the barbarians. His only option was to develop his strength as quickly as possible and prepare for any potential future changes. Next was the second piece of intelligence. There were ice dire wolves in the Azure Rock Rift. The cubs were the key to this intelligence. Ice dire wolves were apex predators on the northern snowfields. Adult ice dire wolves were enormous, incredibly fast, and could survive in the extreme cold. More importantly, their keen sense of smell made them ideal for reconnaissance and combat. However, adult wolves were extremely difficult to tame, almost impossible for humans to control. But the cubs were different. If they were tamed from a young age, the Crimson Tide territory would possess a unique fighting force, the Wolf Riders. Lewis guessed that the parents of these cubs were the ice dire wolves they had hunted on their way to the Crimson Tide territory. What a coincidence. "I'll set off with my men tomorrow," Lewis muttered to himself. The last piece of intelligence made him completely delighted. Frostblood crimson berry, an extremely rare mutated berry. Resembling ordinary cranberries in appearance, but with a deep red color, thick juice, and abundant magical power, these berries can enhance the battle aura of bloodline knights and promote cultivation growth. If this could be cultivated on a large scale, it would be the most precious specialty of the Crimson Tide territory. However, Lewis realized a problem. Even if he rushed to Frost Spear City at full speed, 4 days wouldn't be enough. Just 1 day's delay could mean someone else would get there first. And the value of frostblood crimson berries was too great. He had to ensure they fell into his hands. Lewis couldn't take that risk. He made a decisive move, immediately summoning Lambert and 2 other elite knights. Lambert was his guardian knight, With him leading the expedition, Lewis could rest assured. "Lambert," Lewis said in a deep voice, his eyes serious, "the three of you must proceed to Prosperous City as quickly as possible, and arrive within 3 days." He paused, then continued, "on the east side of the market. There's a merchant named Jack who will be selling cranberry seeds in 4 days. Arrive 2 days early, stake out the market, and make sure you buy all his stock immediately." Lambert was slightly taken aback, but immediately nodded firmly in acceptance. "Yes, sir." He was quite puzzled as to why the Lord would value a few berry seeds so much, yet immediately accept the order without hesitation. Because, throughout this journey, every decision Lewis had made had ultimately proven to be correct. Lewis suddenly felt that since he was going to Prosperous City, he might as well take care of a few things while he was there. He took a piece of parchment from his desk and wrote a letter. The letter was simple: first, to let him know he was safe; second, to request some gold coins. Although he wasn't sure if his cold-blooded father would respond, it wouldn't hurt to try. Even sending just a small amount of funds would allow the Crimson Tide territory to develop faster. After writing, he sealed the letter, stamped it with his seal, and handed it to Lambert. "Once you reach Prosperous City, give this letter to the head of our family's merchant guild and have them send it back as soon as possible." Lambert took the letter, carefully put it away, and nodded in agreement. "Understood. Make sure there are no mistakes," Lewis repeatedly instructed. "Understood." The three mounted their war horses and galloped towards Prosperous City. The next morning, Lewis led 5 elite hunters and 8 regular knights across the frozen ground, heading straight for the Azure Rock Rift. "Have you confirmed it?" Lewis glanced at the hunter leading the group, Ager. Ager respectfully replied, "As per your orders, we sent men to investigate last night. The wolf pack has lost its leader. Most of them are cubs and a few elderly mother wolves, hiding in caves deep within the rift. It's a good opportunity." Lewis and his men's target was naturally the ice wolf cubs. The group cautiously approached the ravine. The snow was covered with the wolf paw prints and bloodstains, suggesting a fierce battle had taken place the previous night. Ager pointed to a patch of messy snow. "Look, these paw prints are very disordered, indicating there might have been a fight within the pack. With a leader dead, the pack is leaderless. Infighting is natural. We'll split into 2 teams. One will create a disturbance to attract the adult wolves' attention, while the other will sneak into the den and retrieve the cubs." Lewis looked at the hunters and slowly said, "Let's begin." Several hunters scattered pre-prepared blood and carcasses outside the cave, tying the largest pieces to the back of the knights' horses. This was fresh venison and animal bones, mixed with a strong stench of blood, designed to maximize the hunting instincts of the adult dire wolves. A strong smell of blood quickly filled the air. Soon, a low growl echoed from the depths of the cave, and pairs of eerie green eyes opened in the darkness. "They're here," Ager whispered. 5 massive adult dire wolves slowly emerged from their den, their eyes scanning the surroundings warily, low growls emanating from their throats. Their gazes locked onto the distant carcass of their prey, and their pace quickened as they galloped towards it. The knights immediately spurred their horses forward, using ropes to drag the carcass away from the den. The lead wolf charged towards the knights, the others close behind. This was, of course, a carefully laid trap. Once the adult wolves were far enough away from the cubs, the knights abruptly pulled on the reins, turning their horses around. Long swords gleamed with a cold, sharp light, and slashed down. Thud! The lead wolf didn't even have time to react before the sword pierced its throat. The other adult wolves howled angrily, trying to retaliate. Unfortunately, they were not facing ordinary hunters, but rather formal knights with a battle aura. The stench of blood filled the air as the wolves fell one after another in a one-sided slaughter. Within minutes, the knights had eliminated all the adult wolves. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15: Dire Wolf Cubs. While the knight easily killed the adult dire wolf, Lewis and his group had already swiftly infiltrated the wolf pack's den. "Light a fire," Lewis whispered. Several hunters immediately pulled out torches and gently lit them. The warm orange light illuminated the cave interior, the rough rock walls filled with a distinctive stench of wild animals. Their eyes scanned the surroundings, and they quickly spotted their target deep within the cave. A dozen or so dire wolf cubs huddled together, shivering. They weren't very large, Their fur thick and white as frost, their eyes filled with fear of humans. "So many cubs," one hunter exclaimed in surprise. Ager licked his chapped lips, his gaze burning. "These little guys will definitely be top hunters when they grow up." Several cubs let out a low, fierce growl, trying to warn the intruders. When you're weak, even anger appears cute to others. "These little guys have quite a temper," Ager smiled. "Come on, little ones, have something to eat." A hunter gently placed a piece of meat in front of the wolf cubs huddled in the rock crevice, deliberately taking a half step back to avoid appearing too threatening. The meat had been specially coated with a sedative made from herbs. This effectively calmed the cubs, allowing them to relax unconsciously. Several bolder, hungry cubs sniffed the aroma of the meat in the air, hesitated for a moment, and finally couldn't resist cautiously approaching to nibble. Seeing that their companions were unharmed after eating the meat, more cubs soon began to scramble for it, even pushing their companions away with their little paws, afraid of being taken advantage of. However, in less than 2 minutes, the sedative herbs began to take effect. The previously wary cubs, after eating the meat, became dazed, even unsteady on their feet, their small bodies swaying slightly. "We can start now," Ager whispered. "Be gentle, these are future werewolves," Lewis instructed. "Understood." The hunters gently wrapped each wolf cub in animal hide to prevent them from struggling due to discomfort. Although a few wolf cubs remained conscious and resisted, struggling against the hunters, they were ultimately too weak and were quickly and easily stuffed into the leather bags. In this way, all 20-odd wolf cubs were rendered powerless and placed one by one into specially made leather bags, ensuring they wouldn't be injured during transport. Mission accomplished. Lewis looked at the wolf cubs being stuffed into the bags and smiled. "Let's go." The hunters immediately shouldered the bags, left the cave to rejoin the knights, and hurried back towards their territory. After the wolf cubs were brought back to Red Tide territory, Lewis ordered them to be placed in a pre-arranged wooden enclosure. The enclosure was very spacious, with a thick layer of dry grass on the ground, and several soft dens made of animal hides were even built in the corners to simulate the living environment of a wolf pack and reduce their anxiety. Nevertheless, after experiencing this sudden change, the wolf cubs were wary. They huddled together, their furry ears perked up, revealing their small but sharp teeth, ready to defend themselves against any external threats. Lewis stood before the fence, his gaze fixed on the most distinctive wolf cub in the center. It was a cub significantly larger than its companions, with long limbs and a defiant look in its eyes. Even as the other cubs huddled together, whimpering softly, it stood ramrod straight, its sharp gaze sweeping over the humans outside the fence, showing no sign of the young animal's panic. This innate aura made it instantly distinguishable from the others. "This fellow," Edgar exclaimed, noticing it too, "is a potential wolf king." A potential wolf king. Lewis suddenly realized something, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Then you'll be called Cold Front." The cub's ears twitched slightly, as if sensing the human's discussion. However, it didn't flinch, but instead watched them warily. "Edgar, how do you think we should tame them?" Lewis turned to the hunter Edgar beside him. Edgar's heart skipped a beat. The question, seemingly casual, carried a subtle hint of a test. He knew that the Lord was assessing his abilities. Ager dared not be negligent in the slightest, quickly gathering his thoughts and respectfully replying, "First, we must establish dependence. Wolves need safety and food, so we must ensure they see humans every time we feed them, so they will see humans as their providers. But that's not enough. Wolves are naturally fierce, taming them with food alone is unrealistic. They will guard their food and even attack humans. We must teach them obedience in a more direct way. Specifically, if a wolf guards its food, it must be disciplined immediately. If it resists, pin it to the ground until it gives up." In the wolf pack world, might makes right. Lewis nodded in satisfaction. "Continue." Ager's spirits lifted, his tension easing slightly, and he continued, "The second step is to establish order." He pointed to Lang Feng. "There's a clear hierarchy within the wolf pack, and the strongest wolf cub, its size, demeanor, and eyes all prove it's born the alpha. Once it's tamed, the other cubs will naturally follow." Hearing this, Lewis thoughtfully reached out and gently tapped the fence. Lang Feng instinctively looked up, staring at him with a hint of wariness in his eyes, but did not immediately back down. "So, what's your suggestion?" Lewis continued to ask. Ager mustered his courage and said, "You should tame Lang Feng yourself. Only when Lang Feng recognizes you as their master will they be absolutely loyal to you." As soon as these words were spoken, the surrounding hunters couldn't help but look at Ager in surprise. Let the Lord tame wolves himself? This was no ordinary audacity. Lewis, however, revealed a meaningful smile. The daily intelligence system had reminded him that Ager was a master beast tamer. Now it seemed that he was right. This old man had something. Lewis slowly stood up and patted Ager on the shoulder. Very good. From today onwards, you will be in charge of all beast taming affairs in the Crimson Tide territory. Ager was stunned for a moment, then an uncontrollable excitement burst forth in his heart, and he suddenly knelt on one knee. Your subordinate will not fail your expectations. A few months ago, he was still a poor wretch wandering in the north, barely surviving by hunting. If it weren't for Lewis's team passing by, he would probably have frozen to death in the snow long ago. Now, he has not only gained the Lord's favor but has also been entrusted with an important task. Moreover, given the Lord's character, if he performs well, he will certainly not treat him unfairly. The hunters watching all cast envious glances at him. Ager is lucky, indeed. His status will probably be different from now on. Chapter 16 The Seed Prince. Jack was originally just a small-time seed merchant in the south, barely making ends meet by selling grain and fruit seeds. Life wasn't wealthy, but it was enough to eat and drink. Until a few months ago, he overheard a fellow merchant boasting in a tavern. After the Northern Reclamation Order was issued, many nobles flocked to the north to clear land, creating a huge demand for seeds. Supply couldn't meet demand. This rumor thrilled him. In the south, seed merchants were as plentiful as horsemen are on the roadside, hundreds of people vying for a single piece of cake. Making big money was nearly impossible. But the north was different. He'd heard it was barren and desolate. Seeds were hard to come by, but once the goods arrived, there was no worry about selling them. This is a chance to get rich. Jack excitedly exchanged all his savings for seeds. He loaded his small truck full and drove non-stop to the north, dreaming of becoming rich overnight. However, the moment he stepped into Frostspear City, he was utterly dumbfounded. Isn't this the largest city in the north? The city was dilapidated, the streets muddy, the pedestrians dressed in tattered clothes, all looking weary. There wasn't a trace of bustling business activity to be seen. Jack's heart skipped a beat, a sense of foreboding washed over him. Oh no, am I going to lose everything? But since he was already here, he couldn't leave empty-handed. So, steeling himself, he found an open space on the east side of the market and set up his little stall. Are you Jack, the seed seller? Before he could even set up his goods, 3 knights rode up, still dusty from their journey, their armor splattered with mud, their expressions somewhat urgent. Jack froze, his heart pounding. Why did they know his name? Had his reputation as the Seed Prince spread from the central province to the northern province? But since they were guests, he quickly straightened his back, cleared his throat, and prepared to introduce his goods. What would you gentlemen like? We have rye, oats, wheat. The leading knight interrupted him abruptly. All of them. What? Jack was shocked, wondering if he'd misheard. We'll take them all. How much? Jack was truly dumbfounded. Were the northerners really this extravagant? Jack's mind raced, calculating how much he could sell his shipment for. Finally, he feigned hesitation, holding up 5 fingers. Since you'll take them all, I'll give you a discount. 5 gold coins. 5 gold coins. In the south, a bag of potato seeds cost only 2 iron coins. The total cost of his entire cartload of seeds was less than 1 gold coin. Jack was prepared for haggling, even planning to lower the price further if the other party wasn't happy. All right, to his surprise, the leading knight didn't even listen, simply pulling 5 gold coins from his pouch and casually tossing them to him. Then, he and the other 2 knights quickly packed up all his seeds and hurried away. Jack stood there, dumbfounded, clutching 5 heavy gold coins. When the cold wind blew past, he realized his stall had been completely emptied. He quickly checked the coins, examining each one to make sure they were all genuine. Really, real. The next second, a surge of ecstatic joy overwhelmed him, and Jack almost jumped for joy. I'm rich. His seeds, plus the travel expenses to the north, cost less than a gold coin, and now he'd made a net profit of 4 gold coins. And he'd done almost nothing. Was business in the north really this easy? Jack gripped the coins tightly, his mind already racing with his next plan. This was nothing. If he went back and wholesaled a few hundred more bags of seeds to sell, wouldn't he earn hundreds of gold coins? Thinking this, Jack's lips curled into a 90-degree smile. The north was practically a gold mine. He was going to go back, take out a loan, and become the #1 seed merchant in the north. Of course, he didn't know that the seeds he had just sold included frostbite crimson berry seeds, which could fetch thousands of gold coins. Otherwise, he would have been kicking himself. As for his later story of losing everything, that's another story. Just as Lambert was rushing back to Red Tide territory with his seeds, Lewis was riding his horse to inspect the planting progress in the fields. In the fields, farmers were busy sowing seeds, the sound of hoes turning the soil rising and falling. Wherever Lewis went, the farmers stopped what they were doing and bowed respectfully. But unlike in other noble territories, the farmers here didn't have a humble fear in their eyes, but rather a heartfelt respect. Especially the laborers who were born slaves, their eyes held a burning light as they looked at Lewis. They longed for their efforts to be noticed by the Lord, so that they could gain their freedom. Lewis saw all this, but didn't show much emotion. After all, in his eyes, there was no difference between slaves and free people. They were all cattle and horses of Red Tide territory. Moreover, the current system motivates these people to work harder, so he's in no hurry to change it. Perhaps a more prudent approach could be considered to free the slaves when the time is right, but for now, they must prove their worth. Just then, Mick walked over, hoe in hand, his face beaming with undisguised joy. "Sir," Mick wiped the sweat from his brow, his smile deepening his wrinkles. "This fertilizer is working wonderfully. This year will definitely be a good harvest." Lewis glanced at the plowed field, noticing the soil was indeed moist and soft, a deep color, clearly having fully absorbed the nutrients. He nodded slightly. "What are the first crops?" "Rye, turnips, and potatoes," Mick replied immediately. "These crops are cold-resistant and mature quickly. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, the first harvest will be ready in 3 months." Lewis nodded in agreement. "Rye can be ground into coarse grains, turnips can be used as vegetables or livestock feed, and potatoes are easy to grow and harvest, with a long storage life, making them ideal as emergency food. Although some areas of Red Tide territory benefit from geothermal activity, making them far better off than other parts of the north, not all land is suitable for intensive agriculture. For the sake of stability, prioritizing the planting of cold-resistant crops is the most sensible choice. But this is far from enough to satisfy Lewis's ambition. Once greenhouse cultivation technology is perfected, he wants to grow a wider variety of crops to completely solve Red Tide territory's food problem. Lewis stood quietly on the edge of the field, his gaze sweeping across the land before him. The fertile black soil gleamed in the sunlight, and the busy figures of farmers crisscrossed the landscape, sowing the seeds of hope for Red Tide territory's future. This once barren frozen land was gradually being given life under his planning. An indescribable sense of accomplishment welled up within Lewis. Chapter 17 Bloodstained Cold Moon. Dead, all dead. Sif's heart pounded. She squeezed her horse's flanks with all her might, the warhorse galloping wildly across the cold snowfield, its hooves kicking up a cloud of white dust. The shouts of battle echoed behind her in the night, the howling of hunting dogs mingling with the screams of warriors. Why? Why did it have to come to this? Just days ago, she was sitting in her warm tent, listening to her father recount the tribe's glory, her brothers laughing and playing, her mother gently tidying her hair. She had thought that she would one day lead her people to conquer the snowfields, just like her father. But that banquet had utterly destroyed everything. Her father, Harold Frostmane, suddenly collapsed at the banquet, convulsing, letting out a painful howl, dying before everyone's eyes. In the following days, her mother, brothers, and sisters died one by one. Some were executed, others died in mysterious accidents. Their heads were hung on stone pillars, blood dripping onto the white snow, a glaring red. The words her brother Siegel had just spoken still echoed in her mind. "Sif, listen." Siegel gripped her shoulders, his voice urgent. "Run south, and never come back." She shook her head desperately, tears welling in her eyes. "No. Brother, Siegel grabbed the back of her neck, forcing her to look up at him. "Listen. Run south. Don't come back. Don't even think about revenge." Without another word, Siegel lashed his horse with all his might, drew his battle axe, and turned to face the pursuers. "Ha!" he roared, his blood boiling. His eyes turned bloodshot, the totems on his body suddenly lit up, his muscles bulged like rocks, and he became like a raging war god. A berserker. Burning his own blood for a brief moment of invincibility at the cost of his life. "Come on, you scum. Let's go to hell together," he laughed maniacally, raising his great axe to meet the enemies surging from the darkness. Sif's heart felt like it was being torn apart. She wanted to rush forward and fight alongside her brother, but her warhorse had already carried her south, the chill hadn't completely faded, and the river on the western side of the red tide territory still carried the lingering cold of winter. Every spring and autumn, this river welcomes migrating schools of fish. They swim upstream to spawn in the shallows, and after the fry hatch, they return to the deeper waters with the current. The indigenous people have known this natural phenomenon since ancient times, but their fishing methods are still limited to poking fish with wooden spears and scooping them up with bamboo baskets. So, while they can barely fill their stomachs, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the river's true potential. Therefore, under Lewis's orders, 100 fishermen set off for the riverbank to begin an organized fisheries development project. They built a makeshift dock using wooden stakes and stones. Carpenters were also summoned to lead the fishermen in building fishing boats day and night. Working tirelessly, they finally built 10 boats capable of operating within 2 weeks, preparing for the upcoming fish tides. The fisheries here underwent a dramatic transformation in those 2 weeks. But no one expected their first large-scale fishing expedition to come so quickly. The cause was that Lewis received an important intelligence report in the daily intelligence system yesterday. 1. Tomorrow, a large number of fish will enter the river on the west side of red tide territory. This news excited him greatly, and he immediately ordered, all fishermen, assemble at the riverbank dock and prepare to fish with all your might. So the next day, the riverbank was crowded with people, and 100 fishermen lined up neatly to await the Lord's orders. On the simple but already well-established wooden dock, Lord Lewis stood on high ground, surveying the crowd. Gentlemen, today we will embark on the first large-scale fishing operation in red tide territory. Do you remember how desolate this place was a month ago? But look at us now. We have boats, fishing nets, and a dock, all thanks to your hard work. We will no longer simply wait for a fate's handouts, but will seize our future with our own hands. And today, everything is ready. We only need to reach out and let the entire red tide territory know that the days of hunger are over. May we return with a full catch. The fishermen, ignited by Lewis's words, raised their nets and harpoons, shouting in unison, returned with a full catch. But Luke, the fisheries officer beside Lewis, revealed an indescribable anxiety in his eyes. Will there really be any fish? Over the past month, Lewis's judgment had been repeatedly proven correct, forcing Luke and the others to believe him. But the problem was, this was fishing. Fishing is largely a matter of luck. Even the most experienced fisherman can hardly predict which day will bring a bumper harvest and which will result in an empty net. He was somewhat surprised when he received Lewis's message yesterday. Why was the Lord so certain that there would be a large catch today? What if there wasn't? If the river didn't yield much today, his inspiring speech would become a joke. Moreover, the fishermen had prepared with high hopes for half a month, only to return empty-handed. The morale of the fishermen would be affected, which was a minor matter. The most important thing was whether the Lord would be furious. What should he do then? Would the Lord strip him naked and throw him into the river to bait the fish pond? Luke secretly glanced at Lewis and found that the latter was not flustered at all. He stood there with a faint smile on his face, as if he could already see the fish surging on the river. Is this the Lord's spirit? Luke was a little lost in thought. Just then, Lewis interrupted Luke's reverie. Is everything ready? Ready, Luke hurriedly replied. Lewis nodded. Let's begin. Luke took a deep breath, stood on the platform, and loudly gave the order, brothers, proceed as planned. The fishermen, who had been waiting for a long time, began to divide the work. According to Lewis's plan, today's fishing operation would be divided into 3 groups to ensure maximum efficiency. The first group was the main force, consisting of 10 fishing boats. The fishermen skillfully maneuvered the boats, setting up purse seines in the middle of the river, forming a huge net barrier. The second group was a smaller fishing team. Relatively few in number, they were responsible for casting nets in the shallow waters along the shore, catching fish close to the bank. The fishermen were skilled, quickly casting the nets into the water, the mesh size just right for catching smaller fish. The third group was a small team using traditional fishing tools. They held harpoons, quickly probing the water, and once they spotted a school of fish, they swiftly and forcefully stabbed it, capturing the fleeing fish. Some fishermen also set traps along the shore. These simple yet effective tools effectively caught some fish that were unwilling to approach the nets, further supplementing the catch. Chapter 18: A bumper harvest in the fisheries. Brothers, Proceed as planned, Luke shouted, and the riverbank instantly erupted in activity. 10 fishing boats lined up in formation, their oars churning the water. Then, the fishermen lowered huge purse seine nets into the river. These nets had been carefully modified, tightening instantly upon sinking. Hold the line. Don't let the fish escape, the captain, Reg, had veins bulging on his arms, his hemp rope taut like a bowstring. Dark shadows darted about underwater, surging in like a tidal wave. They're in. They're in, someone shouted, and suddenly the entire river seemed to explode. Fat, large fish splashed against the nets, but the ironclad encirclement of 10 boats left them no way out. The fishermen swiftly tightened the ropes, securing them firmly. The water surface instantly surged with countless splashes as fish leaped out, their silvery scales shimmering in the sunlight, a truly captivating sight. Pull. Don't let the net slip, haha, this is the most fish I've ever seen in my life. The fishermen tightened their arms, pulling together with all their might. The net tightened, its heavy weight even causing the boat to tilt slightly. When the last net was finally pulled in, the boat was piled high with wriggling fish. Each fish was much larger than ordinary river fish, gleaming with an alluring sheen, their plump bodies constantly shifting. This time, their catch exceeded everyone's expectations. More than 2,000 fish, enough to feed the entire red tide territory for several days. On the other side of the riverbank, the fishermen casting their nets were equally focused. The angle of the net must be precise, otherwise you'll easily miss the schools of fish, an experienced old fisherman instructed a young apprentice beside him. The inexperienced young man took a deep breath, gripped the net firmly with both hands, and then cast it with a mighty throw. The net traced a perfect arc in the air, ensnaring a group of fish that hadn't yet escaped. Got it, he excitedly pulled the rope tight, the water churning instantly as 2-foot-long, plump fish were caught, struggling desperately. This one's huge, he excitedly held up a fish nearly an arm's length long, drawing envious glances from his companions. If we made soup with this, I can't even imagine how delicious it would be. The group grinned from ear to ear, their hands moving even faster. Although their catch couldn't compare to the purse seine team, they still successfully caught hundreds of fresh fish, filling everyone's buckets to the brim. On the other side of the riverbank, a traditional fishing group composed of indigenous people was engaged in another form of hunt. Each of them gripped a gleaming harpoon, their eyes practically plunging into the river. Here it comes, a seasoned fisherman swung his arm sharply, the harpoon plunging into the water. Splash, blood foam rose to the surface of the water as a large fish, weighing at least 3 pounds, was firmly speared, struggling desperately but ultimately unable to escape its fate. In just that short time, 7 or 8 large fish were already piled up in the wooden buckets at their feet, their tails still thrashing outside the rim. Further out in the shallows, some fishermen quietly placed fish traps into the already prepared snares, waiting for the fish to stumble in. Wait a little longer, wait a little longer. Suddenly, a fisherman's eyes lit up, and he quickly lifted the fish trap. Got some. More than a dozen, they cheered excitedly. Although these fish were not large, their flesh was delicate, making them a highly sought-after delicacy. The entire fishing operation lasted for several hours before the fishermen slowly pulled in their nets. Every boat was piled high with live fish. They flapped their scales, their tails slapping loudly, splashing water everywhere. More than 3,000 fish. More than 3,000. When the final count came out, the entire dock erupted in cheers. Lord, you are truly a master strategist. He said there would be fish today, and there really are. We've never seen such a fishing method before, catching so many in one go. Lord, you not only know how to govern your territory, but you're also incredibly skilled at fishing. The fishermen clapped and cheered excitedly, patting each other on the shoulder, their faces beaming with joy as they praised Lewis. Those fishermen who had initially been skeptical about today's catch were now completely convinced by the facts. Luke stood aside, watching this scene, his heart filled with indescribable shock. His initial apprehension had long since been replaced by surprise. He truly hadn't expected Lewis's prediction to be so accurate, even unbelievable. He couldn't help but look up at the Lord standing high on the dock. Lewis wore a faint smile. Seeing the satisfied smiles on the fishermen's faces, his mood also brightened. He knew he had just taken the first step in pulling Red Tide territory out of its predicament. Red Tide territory's food crisis could finally be alleviated. Moreover, today's catch was just the beginning. This was a long-term industry. As a transmigrator, Lewis naturally understood the importance of sustainability, so he formulated a meticulous fishing strategy early on. First, to ensure the continuous reproduction of fish, Lewis required that the mesh size of all fishing nets be enlarged. This would allow immature fry to easily escape, continue growing, and wait for the next breeding season. Furthermore, fishing was only allowed at fixed times each day, with at least one day of rest each week to give the rivers and fish a chance to recover. Only in this way could the future catch be continuous, rather than suddenly drying up. And it wasn't just about wild fishing. Lewis also planned to establish dedicated aquaculture areas. Selecting high-quality fish as breeding stock would be cultivated in specific waters, making the fishery more stable, rather than relying entirely on nature's bounty. Lewis looked at the mountains of fish piled up on the dock, wondering how to handle them. No matter how much food there was, if it wasn't properly managed, it would become a waste. He decided to hold a celebration banquet. In just a few days, it would be exactly 1 month since he arrived in Red Tide Territory. This was a memorable day. In this month, Red Tide Territory had transformed from a resource-scarce wasteland with low morale. Order was gradually restored, and with the reconstruction of fishing and agriculture, the lives of the people began to look up with hope. Lewis knew this wasn't entirely his doing. Therefore, this banquet wasn't just a celebration of the bountiful fishing harvest, but also a tribute to the fishermen, artisans, and soldiers who had contributed to Red Tide Territory. However, the banquet could only consume a portion of the catch. A large quantity of fish still needed proper handling. Although it would only feed 1,000-odd people for a few days, fishing was a long-term industry. The fish caught couldn't be wasted. They needed to be preserved for a long time to prepare for food shortages in winter. Lewis suddenly thought of a way to preserve the fish for a long period, and he decided to try it. Chapter 19: Smoked Fish. The evening glow bathed the Red Tide Territory. In the smoking shed near the hot springs, several smoked fish hung on wooden racks, their golden skin slightly wrinkled, emitting a rich smoky aroma. Lewis stood to one side, his gaze scrutinizing the fish, which had been smoking for hours. He then gently pressed the surface with his fingers. The dry, springy texture made him nod in satisfaction. Master, Sally stood to the side, speaking cautiously, her hands unconsciously twisting together. Her eyes held nervousness, afraid her smoked fish wasn't good enough. Lewis looked up, praising, "Well done, the texture and color of the fish are excellent." Sally breathed a sigh of relief, a nervous smile appearing on her face. It's all according to your method. Without your guidance, how could we have made it? You're all skillful," Lewis said, casually tearing off a piece of fish and popping it into his mouth. Although the fish was dry and hard, the rich smoky aroma slowly spread in his mouth as he chewed. The taste was quite good. Standing to the side, Hilko crossed his arms, yawning wearily, his dark circles practically touching the floor. It wasn't that Lewis was deliberately exploiting him, it was just that they were the only two literate people in the entire territory. So, he had to be forced to work 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Today, to comfort him, Lewis had brought him here to eat fish. "Hey, try some," Lewis said, handing him a smoked fish. A flicker of interest crossed Hilko's tired eyes, and he took a bite. "It tastes better than I expected. This is the result of Sally's hard work," Lewis praised. Hearing her name, Sally panicked, waving her hands hastily. No, I smoked these fish according to your instructions. I don't know anything about this." Lewis listened quietly to Sally's words, his gaze fixed on the smoked fish. Red Tide Territory was located in the cold north, with limited food resources. While fishing was an important source of supplies, the rivers almost froze over every winter and early spring, resulting in virtually no catch. To avoid famine, he had to find an effective way to preserve food for the long winter. So Lewis came up with an innovative method, using geothermal heat to smoke fish. Hot spring smoked fish? Really? When Hilko first heard the plan, her eyes were filled with disbelief. Compared to simply sun-drying, this removes more moisture and extends the shelf life, Lewis explained. In any case, this method was worth trying. So he chose the meticulous and skillful Sally to lead the women in the initial trial. The first step was processing the fish. First, the fish's belly was opened, and the internal organs were removed, but the skin had to be retained. The skin not only prevented the fish meat from falling apart during smoking, but also locked in the aroma, making the smoked fish taste better. Next, it was marinated with coarse salt for several hours to a day, depending on the weather and humidity. This both removed the fishy smell and enhanced the freshness, and also removed some moisture, preparing it for the subsequent smoking. The second step was building the smoking racks. In the hot spring area, a row of smoking racks was woven from branches, bamboo strips, and rattan. They also added simple windproof and heat-insulating facilities to both sides of the rack, allowing the hot spring steam to penetrate the fish meat to the maximum extent while preventing heat loss. The third step is the smoking process. Geothermal resources are not stable, so the smoking time is divided into 2 to 3 days, carried out in multiple rounds. At a low temperature of around 20 degrees Celsius, some moisture can be removed to allow for longer preservation, but if it is too hot, it is more like being roasted, and the water content will be too high, and the preservation time will not be as good. Therefore, the time and temperature of each batch of smoked fish must be carefully adjusted. All of this seems tedious, but after Sally's continuous attempts over this period of time, a small-scale success has been achieved. The fish hanging on the smoking rack is already one of the hopes for red tide territory to survive the winter. Lewis nodded slightly. We can now scale up the scale. A hint of surprise flashed in Sally's eyes. She and the women under her command had been working hard for several days. In this world where force is the mainstay, the status of women has never been high. If they can take on the important task of smoking fish, their status in red tide territory will also be greatly improved. She pursed her lips and asked cautiously, "My lord, do you mean we're to be in charge of the smoked fish? You've done a good job, haven't you?" Lewis glanced at her indifferently, his gaze sweeping over the smoking rack. If the scale expands, experienced people will naturally take charge. Sally's heart raced, and she unconsciously gripped her apron, feeling an unprecedented sense of security. "Thank you, my lord," she bowed almost instinctively, her voice trembling slightly. Lewis smiled. "It's me who should thank you." At this moment, a knight approached and whispered in Lewis's ear, "Lord Lambert has returned." Lewis's eyes lit up. This was double good news. He immediately strode towards the residential area to greet the three who had just entered. Lambert knelt on one knee and whispered, "I have fulfilled my mission." Lewis nodded slightly, a hint of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. The composed Lambert always gave people a sense of reassurance. "You've worked hard," he said in a deep voice, then his gaze swept over the other two elite knights behind him. Although they were slightly more tired than Lambert, none of them complained about the hardships of the journey. "A detailed report will be given tomorrow," Lewis said with a gentle smile. "Get some rest tonight. You will all receive your due rewards at tomorrow's commendation ceremony." The three knights bowed simultaneously, their attitude respectful. "Yes, sir. Leave the seeds behind, and go and rest." The three knights handed their bundles to their attendants without hesitation and left, weary from the journey. Even elite knights would inevitably feel physically and mentally exhausted after such a long journey using their battle aura. Lewis watched them leave until their figures disappeared before turning and heading towards his office, his attendant following closely behind carrying large and small bags of seeds. The bags of seeds were neatly stacked on his desk, all the fruits of their purchase. Lewis waved his hand, signaling the attendant to leave. Once the door closed gently, he stepped to his desk and, using the information system's prompts, located the seeds he was looking for. He gently picked one up and examined it in his hand. The seed was reddish-brown with a smooth surface, at first glance indistinguishable from ordinary cranberry seeds. If it weren't for his intelligence network, he probably would have mistaken it for an ordinary seed. But it was anything but ordinary. This was the frostblood crimson berry, a special fruit corrupted by the demonic power of the frigid north. Consuming it not only strengthened the body but also had miraculous effects on the refinement of a knight's battle aura. This meant that, once successfully cultivated, it could not only become a unique specialty of the Crimson Tide territory but also a strategic resource fiercely contested by various nobles. Lewis looked at the seed as if he saw mountains of gold and silver beckoning him. Chapter 20 Commendation Conference. A full month had passed since Lewis arrived in Crimson Tide territory. He stood on a makeshift wooden platform, looking down at the assembled crowd. 12 armored knights stood on either side, their posture deliberately uniform, making their lord's figure appear even more imposing in the firelight. Woo! As the horn pierced the night, the Crimson Tide territory's commendation ceremony officially began. More than 30 Crimson Tide knights knelt on one knee. Left fist to chest, right hand gripping their swords, they recited in unison the oath Lewis had prepared beforehand. "We believe in the dragon ancestor, Follow the Lord of the Crimson Tide. Loyal to Louis Calvin, we swear to defend the glory of the Crimson Tide with our blood and sweat. The resounding oath echoed across the square. Then, the entire square erupted in deafening cheers. Soldiers banged their shields, farmers raised their hoes and staffs, and even children shouted excitedly. Louis slightly raised his hand, signaling for silence. The clamor gradually subsided, and all eyes turned to the young lord. Louis then slowly began to speak. We've been in Red Tide territory for a month now. A month ago, this was a barren and desolate land. We faced trials of poverty, hunger, snowstorms, and wild beast attacks. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled citizens. But now we've weathered the first crisis, all thanks to you. You built the first shelter, so that children and the elderly no longer had to sleep in the snow. You caught the first river fish, filling the bellies of our brothers and sisters. You cultivated the first field, sowing the first seeds, giving hope to this barren land. All of this is because of you, Louis declared passionately. It is your sweat that has brought life to this frozen land. Hearing this, most of the crowd clenched their fists, their eyes reddening with emotion. They had never heard their lord attribute credit to commoners. In the past, they were already fortunate to escape the whipping of the common people. Louis's gaze swept across the crowd in the square. Of course, merit is rewarded. In Red Tide territory, no matter who you are, if you work hard enough and are loyal enough, you will receive the reward you deserve. Next, I will honor those heroes who have made outstanding contributions to Red Tide territory. As soon as he finished speaking, the entire square fell silent. Everyone held their breath, their eyes fixed on the figure on the high platform. Agricultural Officer Mick, the middle-aged man, always hunched over, staggered forward, his old leather boots, stained with mud, slipping on the wooden steps. But when he looked up at the Lord, his spine, which hadn't straightened for decades, straightened perfectly. Mick, you have optimized the land cultivation methods, bringing life to this barren land. Louis pointed to the farmland in the distance, which was already taking shape. Therefore, I officially promote you to agricultural supervisor, granting you greater jurisdiction over the farmland and bestowing upon you an additional plot of land for experimental planting. Tears streamed down Mick's face. Thank you, sir. A burst of enthusiastic applause erupted from the crowd, and many farmers cheered excitedly. Craftsman Representative Mike, an elderly man with sun-darkened skin, strode onto the stage, his face beaming with pride. You have demonstrated extraordinary talent in architectural design, making the houses of Red Tide territory stronger and warmer, laying the foundation for the territory's development. Louis pointed to the rows of semi-subterranean communal dwellings surrounding the square. Therefore, I have decided to grant you the authority to lead the craftsmen's team, and at the same time provide you with more financial support. Mike trembled with excitement. Your subordinate will certainly live up to your expectations, Fisheries Officer Luke. Next, more than 10 people were called to the stage. They came from all walks of life: knights, craftsmen, hunters, farmers. Most of these people came from humble backgrounds, some even slaves. Louis stepped forward and personally pinned a specially made labor medal on each recipient. Due to limited resources, it was just a wooden medal that Louis had a carpenter carefully carve. However, the recipients held it carefully, as if afraid of dropping it. After the awards ceremony, Louis addressed the crowd. These people have shed sweat and blood for the prosperity of Red Tide territory, making tremendous contributions. Let us thank them with applause. A thunderous applause erupted, echoing throughout the square. The award recipients straightened their backs, their eyes filled with tears of emotion, the medals on their chests gleaming brightly in the campfire. They were just ordinary fishermen, hunters, craftsmen, even lowly slaves. Yet now, they stood before everyone's eyes, receiving the highest honor of Red Tide territory. This was a feeling they had never experienced before. If Louis were to ask them to go through fire and water, they would do it without hesitation. Of course, there are others who have also made similar efforts. Let us applaud them as well. His words were barely out when applause broke out again, this time not just for those on the platform, but for everyone present. Because everyone was contributing in their own way to make Red Tide territory stronger. Louis's gaze then slowly swept over the people in the square, their clothes tattered, still bearing the marks of slavery. Heads bowed, eyes gleaming with a mixture of unease and anticipation. Today I will also fulfill another promise of mine. The slaves' hearts pounded, and the air seemed to freeze for a moment. The following, Louis began to read a series of names, all slaves who had excelled in labor, construction, and exploration over the past month. Those whose names were called wore expressions of disbelief. Only when someone nudged them did they react, trembling as they stepped onto the platform. "You are officially free today," Lewis waved his hand, and the knights stepped forward and burned their slave certificates. They wept, kneeling and kowtowing, expressing their gratitude to Lewis in this way. But at the same time, the eyes of those slaves not yet freed shone with complex emotions. There was envy, regret, but mostly hope. If they performed better, next time it would surely be their turn. "Loyalty and talent are more important than bloodline," Lewis's voice echoed across the square. "From this day forward, the Crimson Tide territory will establish a regular reward system. Anyone who contributes to the territory will receive corresponding rewards." These words caused a stir in the square, everyone's faces beaming with hope. Changing one's social class was no longer a distant dream, but a reality that could be achieved through hard work. "To the prosperity of the Crimson Tide territory, cheers!" Lewis raised his glass. The strong liquor reflected the campfire, casting a fiery glow. "Cheers!" Everyone raised their glasses, letting out a deafening cheer. Chapter 21 Sif escapes to the Red Tide territory. The aroma of grilled fish filled the air. Women carried platters of freshly grilled fish. The villagers sat together, holding their freshly grilled fish, eating and chatting, their laughter punctuated by bursts of laughter. "To our great lord," someone shouted. Everyone raised their glasses, excitedly echoing, "To our great lord." Glasses clinked, laughter rising and falling. Lewis, seated at the head of the table, watched all this, a smile involuntarily playing on his lips. He preferred the cutthroat competition of the southern noble banquets to laughing, singing, and dancing around the campfire with the common people. Perhaps the wine was getting to him. Lewis casually accepted his xylophone from a knight. His slender fingers plucked the strings, producing a series of clear notes, and he began to sing a tune from his homeland. "Earth, Edelweiss, Edelweiss, blooming to greet me in the morning, may my homeland be forever blessed." The square fell silent instantly, everyone held their breath, as if transported to that distant place. As the last note faded, cheers erupted like a tidal wave. "One more song," someone shouted. "Lord, you sang so well, one more song." "Cheers to the Lord!" The entire square joined in the commotion, even the most reserved knight couldn't help but laugh. Lewis shook his head and chuckled, casually picking up a piece of grilled fish and taking a bite, letting the laughter drift through the night. The next day, when Lewis woke up, the morning light was already streaming into the room through the gaps in the curtains, the air still carrying the smoke from the campfire of the previous night. "I probably drank a bit too much," he rubbed his temples, sighing wearily. He usually woke up before dawn to practice his breathing techniques in battle key. But last night had been so enjoyable that he'd slept in this morning, a rare occurrence. He subconsciously reached out and touched his side, only breathing a sigh of relief after confirming the other half of the bed was empty. Thank goodness, he hadn't made a mistake. After washing up, Lewis sat cross-legged on the bed, took a deep breath, and slowly began to practice the tidal breathing technique. His battle key flowed slowly through his veins, but Lewis could clearly feel its stagnation. He was still stuck at that bottleneck, a mid-level formal knight, unable to make any progress. Damn it, when would he break through? He had been training according to the strictest methods, but his aptitude was too mediocre. Improving his realm through simple training was much more difficult for him than for others. If only he could find something like the Northern Crystal Cod. Useless system, give me some power. He thought pathetically, and casually opened the intelligence system to see what noteworthy news had been updated today. 1. After the banquet, Agricultural Officer Mick proposed to Tonya and succeeded. 2. The Icefield wolf cub Langfang defeated all the wolf cubs raised by the Red Tide territory and became their wolf king. 3. Princess Sif of the former Frostmoon tribe fled to the Crimson Tide territory. Starving and freezing, she collapsed in the wasteland and will be devoured by a passing frost bear at 5 p.m. The first piece of intelligence made him raise an eyebrow. That old fox, Mick, actually managed to blossom again. This agricultural official spent his days with the soil, his mind constantly focused on optimizing the land and increasing yields. Unexpectedly, he had quietly accomplished something significant. Tonya, he remembered this woman, a native widow in her early 30s with 3 children, resilient and capable. It was truly surprising that Mick had managed to win her over. Congratulations. It seems the Crimson Tide territory's population will increase a few more. He chuckled and shook his head, happy for his old friend. The second piece of news was exactly as he expected. Coldwind had indeed lived up to expectations, standing out among the wolf cubs and becoming the Wolf King. Lewis had had confidence in it from the beginning. After all, this wolf cub possessed an innate, untamed, kingly aura. Its physique, demeanor, and eyes were all different from other ice-filled wolves its age, making its leadership of the pack entirely predictable. Very good, Lewis nodded in satisfaction. This is the werewolf I chose. However, his smile vanished instantly when his gaze fell on the third message. The little princess of the Frost Moon tribe, Sif? Fleeing to the Crimson Tide territory? This intelligence sent a chill down Lewis's spine. The intelligence system had been sending him daily updates on the Frost Moon tribe. Since the old chieftain's death, the tribe had descended into utter chaos. The old chieftain's family had been purged, the Elders' Council had lost its authority, and the leaders were each building their own factions, leading to increasingly fierce factional struggles. In short, the entire Frost Moon tribe was in complete disarray. Even so, Lewis hadn't expected the little princess of the Frost Moon tribe to flee to the Crimson Tide territory and fall unconscious. Worst of all, she was scheduled to be the Frost Bear's dinner at 5 p.m. What's going on? Lewis rubbed his temples and sighed. He faced only two choices, save her or not. He pondered for a long time, his fingertips tapping lightly on the table. Not save her? After all, the affairs of the Frost Moon tribe were extremely complex, and Sif's appearance had a small chance of triggering a series of unknown troubles. Moreover, she was already unconscious in the wasteland, destined to become Frost Bear dinner at 5 o'clock. Death would be the end of it all, and it wouldn't concern him at all. But ultimately, Lewis decided to intervene. Even though the idea was too far-fetched and unrealistic. But what if one day he was strong enough to subdue the Frost Moon tribe in Sif's name? And since Sif had already escaped to the vicinity of Crimson Tide territory, it meant she was far removed from the power struggles of the Frost Moon tribe, making the risk of saving her minimal. Gaining a powerful claim with minimal cost seemed like a worthwhile deal. Of course, it was too early to consider these things now. Lambert, Lewis called for his guardian knight. Lambert entered quickly, bowing respectfully. Lord, I'm going hunting. Have someone prepare, Lewis said casually. Lambert paused, looking at his lord with some surprise. Since arriving in Red Tide territory, this young lord had been busy with territorial affairs from morning till night. He hadn't even had time for a morning walk, let alone hunting. And now he suddenly seemed so eager to go hunting? Of course, eating, drinking, and having fun were normal daily routines for a nobleman. As a competent attendant, Lambert didn't ask further questions, simply nodding and replying, understood. I'll arrange the hunters and knights immediately. He then turned to make the arrangements. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22, While hunting, I found a beautiful girl. Spring had arrived in the north, but the winds were still biting. Sif gripped the reins tightly, her fingertips numb. Her warhorse panted heavily, its hooves thrashing, sweat freezing in the cold night. Faster, faster. Behind her, the flames of the Frost Moon clan burned, the time her brother had bought with his life. She couldn't turn back, she couldn't stop. Run south, never come back, Seagull's roar still echoed in her mind, like a nail driven into the depths of Sif's soul. Seagull was dead, her father, mother, brothers, and sisters were all dead. And she lived on, a wretched existence, like an abandoned soul, wandering in this world without belonging. She knew no home, only fleeing southward. Food was long gone, Sif could only quench her thirst with river water, barely surviving on tree bark and a few wild fruits. After several days, her warhorse finally collapsed from exhaustion with a long neigh. Sif tumbled from its back, falling heavily to the ground. She tried to stand up, but couldn't even move a finger. Her consciousness began to fade, and Seagull's face appeared in her mind. I'm sorry, brother. I can't go on. Her vision blurred, and Sif's consciousness sank into darkness. A large, imposing caravan of the Crimson Tide was marching north. The hunters were focused, the knights warily surveying their surroundings, all eager to make a good impression on the hunt. After all, this hunt was being led personally by their lord. Lewis, draped in a thick wolfskin cloak, rode leisurely on his warhorse. A series of messy animal tracks appeared on the wasteland. An experienced hunter immediately crouched down to examine them, whispering, "My lord, there are signs of hares ahead, and more than one." Lewis nodded slightly, slowly drawing his short bow from his waist, nocking an arrow, and squinting as he focused ahead. Sure enough, near a clump of withered grass not far away, a grayish-white hare cautiously poked its head out. Whoosh! The arrow shot through the air, its trajectory almost invisible, instantly and accurately piercing the rabbit's neck. The rabbit rolled once, twitched twice, and then completely lost its life. Excellent archery, as expected of the Lord. The hunters and knights immediately applauded and cheered, showering him with flattery. The Lord is indeed both scholarly and martial, even his hunting is so precise. Such archery skills would probably make even the kingdom's royal hunters ashamed. If our northern province had 100 such sharpshooters, what would we have to fear from barbarian invasions? Yes, yes. Truly a born warrior. One knight even carried the rabbit to Lewis with both hands, his face full of admiration. Lord, could this rabbit be a descendant of the king of beasts? Otherwise, how could it be so difficult to shoot? Lewis's lips twitched slightly. These people were really good at talking. But he didn't mind. After all, a lord's prestige and reputation sometimes depended on these small legendary deeds. Of course, this hunt was merely a pretext. The real target was the little princess who was about to be devoured by the frostbite white bear. Using the hunt as an excuse to head north to find her was simply because Lewis didn't want anyone to know he possessed prophetic abilities. Of course, Lewis also knew that some of the intelligent people around him had already begun to notice something amiss. They weren't fools. They had long realized that their lord was too lucky. From the south to the northern province, he could accurately foresee all sorts of crises and opportunities. If it were just a coincidence, no one would believe it. But in this fantasy world, even if Lewis directly told them that he had a daily intelligence system, they wouldn't understand what those 6 words meant. After all, this world didn't have web novels. So they attributed it all to the divine grace of the dragon ancestor. What a great harvest this time. Lord, your archery skills are simply divine. That's right. That's right. Even the dragon ancestor is favoring us today. Haha, we must celebrate properly when we get back. And so, the group traveled on, laughing and joking, reaping a bountiful harvest along the way. The hunters had shot and killed several plump wild deer, and even caught some rare cold water fish near the glacier. Relaxing like this once in a while, it doesn't seem so bad. Looking at everyone's cheerful expressions, Lewis couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, a scout rushed back to the group, a strange look on his face. "My lord, we've found a young girl ahead." The hunter's words silenced the entire hunting party instantly, everyone looking at him with suspicion. "A young girl?" Lambert frowned. How could there be a young girl in the wilderness, not far away, near the glacier? The hunter panted, a trace of lingering fear on his face. "She's lying in the snow, seemingly unconscious." "Found her." Lewis's eyes flickered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Lead the way." As they passed through a low grove of trees, near the glacier, they found the unconscious Sif. The girl lay face up on the cold snow, slightly curled up, her short white hair disheveled and streaked with snow. Her fur coat was tattered and worn, her shoulders and arms exposed to the cold, turning purple. Several unhealed wounds showed the hardships she had endured over the past few days. Yet, her delicate face still held a hint of stubbornness, showing no weakness even in her unconscious state. An experienced hunter bent down to observe her for a moment, his expression changing. "My lord, she's from a northern tribe?" Another hunter carefully examined the patterns on her belt and added in a low voice, "The Frost Moon tribe?" The air was silent for a few seconds. The surrounding knights couldn't help but exchange glances. The Frost Moon tribe was a major enemy of the northern province. But Lewis made a decision after only one glance: take her back for treatment. The knights didn't hesitate, quickly picking up the girl and carefully placing her on a war horse. The hunters, with a cart full of game, set off on their return journey. Upon returning to Crimson Tide territory, the girl was taken to an empty room and handed over to a local healer with some medical knowledge. Lewis was silent for a moment, his gaze falling on the girl's face. Her eyes were tightly closed, her lips cracked from hypothermia, and her brows were slightly furrowed, as if she were fighting for her life. Lewis took out a vial of life-saving potion from his family and handed it to the doctor. "Give it to her." The doctor hesitated slightly, but still slowly poured the potion into the girl's lips. After a while, her pale face seemed to regain a little color, and her breathing became more steady. Although she was still unconscious, her life had likely been saved. A vial of life-saving potion is quite expensive. Hopefully, she'll wake up, Lewis said, looking at the unconscious girl. Chapter 23 Identity Exposed. Sigh, if only someone in our territory knew how to concoct magic soil. Lewis sat behind his desk, his fingers tapping unconsciously on the surface, his tone sounding like a casual complaint. But his gaze kept sweeping over Hilko, who was sitting at the small desk next to him. Hilko was engrossed in writing, tallying the catch and smoked fish production, his dark circles even more pronounced than the night before. Hearing Lewis's complaint, he abruptly stopped writing, pressing his temples to try and clear his head. Had he misheard? No, it couldn't be a hallucination. This was the 5th time he'd heard Lewis say this today. Even if he was sleep-deprived, he shouldn't have heard it 5 times, right? Hilko's hand paused slightly, finally confirming one thing. This was clearly a deliberate hint. Concocting magic soil was a basic skill for every alchemist. And he, an alchemical genius, naturally knew it. But the problem was, he hadn't revealed this identity to anyone, at least not within the Crimson Tide territory. So, how did Lewis know? His mind raced, trying to recall if he had inadvertently let something slip. Or was it that he simply couldn't hide his aura of alchemical genius? While he pondered, Lewis spoke again, his tone still tinged with helplessness. If only I could make magic soil myself. This was the 6th time. Lewis's rambling was like a broken record, and Hilko finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a deep breath and feigned nonchalance, saying, I know a little bit, I learned a little at the church school. As soon as he finished speaking, Hilko wanted to slap himself. What a liar. How could a church school teach how to make magic soil? Yet Lewis seemed completely convinced, even feigning sudden realization. He asked with interest, Oh? Is that so? Then can you help me? A subtle silence fell over the office. Did he really believe him? Hilko glanced at Lewis impassively. Lewis's expression didn't suggest he'd been fooled. Instead, it looked more like he was finally admitting it, and he gave him an expectant look as he hurried to prepare the magic soil. Hilko, Lewis, of course, knew Hilko's identity as an alchemy apprentice. Frostblood berries must grow in highly acidic soil to efficiently absorb nutrients, resulting in plump, bright red fruit that enhances battle aura. If this oil is neutral or alkaline, the nutrients will be locked in, leading to poorer plant development, yellowing leaves, and even failure to bear fruit. The problem was, Lewis only had a general understanding of how to prepare acidic soil. He didn't know the specific proportions or methods. But he knew who did, Hilko, the guy hiding his alchemy apprentice identity. Lewis had wanted to wait for Hilko to speak, but the current situation was special. The cultivation of the frostblood berries couldn't be delayed. Unfortunately, he had to reveal himself today. Silence spread between the two, the crackling of the burning firewood in the fireplace. Hilko looked down at the ledger on his table, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, he sighed slowly, as if resigned to his fate. Okay, but I have one condition, let me rest 1 day a week. This time, it was Lewis's turn to be silent. For the Crimson Tide territory, which was currently short-handed, it did feel like a waste of talent. He hadn't had a single day off in a month. But then again, if Hilko continued working at this intensity, he might suddenly die of exhaustion. Lewis sighed. All right. Deal. Then Hilko copied a list of materials for magic soil and gave it to Lewis. Most of the materials could be bought in the market of Frostspear City. But one name made Lewis's gaze linger for a moment, magic marrow. You really dare to ask for that much? Lewis chuckled, looking up at Hilko. I just listed it according to the most standard proportions. Hilko shrugged. Of course, you can use substitutes, but the effect might. Without magic marrow, the effect of the magic soil will be greatly reduced, right? Lewis bluntly stated. Hilko shrugged, remaining silent. Lewis rubbed his temples. Magic marrow was indeed a bit pricey. The Crimson Tide territory did have it, in the mining area to the northwest. However, mining presents some minor difficulties. The mining techniques themselves aren't too difficult, even the crudest method, having the villagers take pickaxes and tap the veins, can yield some usable magical soil. But the real problem lies elsewhere. According to intelligence reports, several frost giants have been frequently roaming near the mining area since spring. Frost giants are among the most troublesome monsters in the north. They typically inhabit frigid regions, are enormous, incredibly strong, and have skin as hard as ice. making them difficult to harm with ordinary weapons. Even more troublesome is their ability to manipulate cold air, creating icy storms that blanket the battlefield, slowing enemies or even freezing them to death. Lewis hadn't rushed to deal with this matter. Firstly, the Red Tide territory was in a development phase, focusing on agriculture and production, leaving no time for the mining area. Secondly, the mining area was far from residential areas, and the giants posed no real threat to the territory. Furthermore, at the time, knowledge of the frost giants was limited, making a hasty attack extremely risky. Therefore, he had only arranged for a few nights to lie in wait and observe in order to gather more intelligence. But now the situation was different. Over the past month, the intelligence system had provided some information about the weaknesses of the frost giants, and the development of the territory had entered a stable phase. It was time to take the initiative to resolve this hidden danger. Since it was necessary to mine the magic marrow, he might as well clear out the mining area and bring this resource completely under the control of the Crimson Tide territory. Lewis pondered for a moment and immediately began to act. He first summoned 2 knights and handed them Hilco's list. Go to Frost Spear City to purchase alchemical materials according to the list on the list, the sooner the better. Yes, the knights took the list and hurriedly left. Then he summoned the knight captain Lambert and said to him, Lambert, gather all the knights and prepare for battle. Lambert was slightly taken aback, but did not ask any questions and immediately replied in a deep voice, Yes, sir. Target, Northwest Mountains, to subdue the frost giants. Lewis continued in a firm tone, Make sure everyone is assembled, there must be no mistakes. Yes, Lambert answered crisply, then got up and strode away. Soon the knights of the Crimson Tide territory quickly assembled, their war horses neighing, and galloped in a mighty procession toward the mining area in the northwest of the Crimson Tide territory. Chapter 24 Hunting the Frost Giants. Lewis stood atop a secluded rock, overlooking an open area below the valley. 4 frost giants were hurling boulders and then sending them flying with massive ice clubs, thoroughly enjoying themselves. Are they playing baseball? Lewis muttered, but he didn't relax at all. These behemoths averaged 5 meters 2 meters tall, their bodies covered in natural armor woven from ice crystals and rock fragments. Just looking at the bulging muscles was enough to conjure up images of terrifying brute strength. Their casually swung ice clubs were easily 6 meters long, leaving a deep trench in the ground when they struck. Even more terrifying was the layer of pale blue icy mist surrounding the frost giants, their extreme cold domain. If an ordinary person got too close, their blood circulation would be slowed, or they would be frozen solid. Luckily, there were only 4. If there were 40, Lewis would have to carry the Red Tide on a nighttime escape. Nervous? Not really. He had already figured out the frost giants' weaknesses and had set up traps in advance. This time, he also brought most of the knights of the Crimson Tide territory and over 100 soldiers. 53 knights against 4 frost giants. The advantage was on our side. Is everyone ready? Lewis asked in a low voice. Yes, sir, everyone is in position, the commander replied. Very good, Lewis nodded slightly. Proceed according to plan. Let these big guys taste the methods of the Crimson Tide territory. He slowly raised his right hand, fingers together, action. The commander waved his banner, and the knights lying in ambush moved simultaneously. Whoosh, a whistling arrow pierced the sky, flames trailing a red trajectory as they crashed into the frost giants' bodies. Startled by the sudden attack, the 4 frost giants, who had been playing happily, froze for a moment, then let out a deafening roar, their massive feet slamming into the ground as they angrily marched towards the flames. Split them up, Lambert shouted. The knights split into 4 groups, harassing the giants from different directions, constantly provoking them with their spears. Each attack struck precisely at the giant's most sensitive spots, knees, face, between fingers, armpits. The giant roared, swinging its massive ice club, trying to crush these insect-like enemies. But the knights were prepared, quickly retreating, using the terrain and their speed to buy time, guiding the giants to their respective ambush areas. A few minutes later, the 4 giants were completely separated, entering different trap zones. Release. The trap team, which had been lying in wait, suddenly unleashed a pre-prepared, weighted rope net. The heavy ropes precisely wrapped around the giant's legs. The giant steps faltered, struggling to break free of the restraints. Knights hidden on the flanks swiftly advanced, their sharp spears or long swords piercing the giant's vulnerable knee joints. Thud! The spears pierced its cold flesh, where the ice armor was weakest. Each thrust caused the giant to roar deafeningly, staggering backward in pain. Retreat, switch positions. The warriors didn't linger, quickly dispersing in different directions, giving the giant no chance to retaliate. The giant roared in agony, kneeling on one knee, its struggling movements suddenly slowing. Soldiers lying in ambush on the other side hurled torches, flames licking at the giant's sturdy ice armor. Soon, their frigid aura began to falter, the surface of the ice armor gradually cracking under the scorching heat. Whoosh! 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 Archers seized the opportunity, firing flaming arrows that pierced the night, aiming straight for the giant's face. Several arrows accurately struck the giant's eyes and cheeks, flames searing their flesh. Roar! The giant clutched its face in agony, struggling violently. Knights, prepare. Target, heart and throat, kill. The knights activated their battle aura, red energy blazing on their long swords and spears. They spurred their horses forward, like red blades, fiercely stabbing towards the giant's heart and throat. Blood splattered, the first giant let out its final scream, its body crashing to the ground. Of course, the other groups didn't all fare so well. A deafening roar suddenly erupted from a trap area. Roar! It was an exceptionally ferocious frost giant, its massive body breaking free of the rope net. With a mere stomp of its thick legs, the trap-strewn ground cracked, sending debris flying. Damn it! This trap can't hold it, the leading knight's expression changed. Just as he was about to order his men to resurround it, the giant went completely berserk. It suddenly spread its arms wide, roared to the sky, and its icy aura surged dramatically. A violent frost storm swept across the area. Boom! The storm, carrying countless sharp ice blades, instantly covered the entire area. The biting wind tore through the earth, and the knights were caught off guard and thrown off balance. Two apprentice knights were directly swept into the storm, their armor instantly covered in a thick layer of ice, their bodies frozen stiff. A sudden gust of wind swirled through the air, flinging them violently into the distance and crashing against a rock face, rendering them incapacitated. Another regular knight, before he could even react, was struck by the giant's massive club. He flew dozens of meters like a kite with a broken string, crashing to the ground and spitting blood. Chaos erupted instantly. But just as the frost giant prepared to swing its club again, a burst of red battle aura suddenly ripped through the blizzard, striking directly at the giant's wrist. Thud! The scorching sword aura tore a long, narrow wound in the giant's cold, iron-like muscles, and deep blue blood spurted out, splashing onto the snow and quickly freezing into ice crystals. Cut off its leg, Lambert roared, raising his greatsword high, imbued with intense battle aura, aiming directly at the giant's knee. Two elite knights followed closely behind, the three forming a triangular assault formation as they charged towards the giant. Ha! Lambert's greatsword slashed down fiercely, targeting the giant's kneecap. Crack! The sword pierced deep into the icy armor, cutting into the tendons, causing the giant's massive body to tremble violently, nearly bringing it to its knees. Another elite knight seized the opportunity, leaping up and thrusting his longsword, burning with fiery battle aura, into the giant's ribs. The last knight then forcefully chopped at the giant's ankle, attempting to completely disrupt its balance. The three swords struck simultaneously, the intense pain enraging the giant. It let out a roar that ripped through the sky, attempting to retaliate with its club again. Stop it! Lambert roared, stomping the ground and leaping up once more. His greatsword slashed horizontally, the blade striking the giant's wrist joint precisely. Crack! The sound of bone breaking was clearly audible. The giant's grip on its club loosened abruptly, the massive icy club slipping from its fingers and crashing heavily to the ground, sending shards of ice flying everywhere. Now, the knights behind him raised their spears, and with a deafening roar, all their weapons simultaneously plunged into the giant's vitals. Thud! 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 Frosty blood splattered, staining the snow red. The raging giant could no longer hold on, and its massive body crashed to the ground, utterly lifeless. Chapter 25 Post-War. The frost giant's corpse lay strewn on the ground, its massive body lifeless, the air thick with a stench of blood. Soldiers busied themselves cleaning up the battlefield, while knights tended to their comrades' wounds. Fortunately, their preparations were thorough, and casualties weren't severe. Most suffered only minor frostbite or abrasions, easily treated with the ointments and bandages they carried. Several medics worked tirelessly, bandaging wounds and applying warm medicine to prevent the chill from penetrating. But the knight who had been knocked away by the raging frost giant was severely wounded. He was pale, blood trickling from his mouth, his armor shattered by the giant, his chest deeply caved in. Clearly, his ribs were broken, and his internal organs were likely badly damaged. Although he still breathed faintly, whether he would survive was uncertain. The medic knelt beside him, his face grave. His injuries are too severe, conventional treatment won't save him. The surrounding knights looked uneasy. This was their comrade. Just moments ago they fought side by side, and now he lies here, barely clinging to life. We can't let him die. Everyone looked up and saw Louis standing to the side. He slowly took out a deep green crystal bottle from his robes, the liquid inside emitting a faint glow. It was an extremely precious life-saving potion, capable of rapidly healing wounds and even pulling the critically injured back from the brink of death. Even nobles treasured this potion, using it only as a last resort. Louis said nothing, kneeling on one knee and personally pouring the potion into the wounded man's mouth. As soon as the potion entered his mouth, a miracle slowly began. His previously weak breathing gradually stabilized, and a trace of color returned to his pale cheeks. His sunken chest slowly rose, broken bones began to heal, and torn internal organs gradually recovered. His almost stopped heartbeat regained its strength. The breath of life returned to this dying knight. His life is no longer in danger. The physician breathed a sigh of relief, but as for the extent of his recovery, that depends on his fate. The knights watched this scene with complex expressions. They looked at Louis with awe, never expecting him to use such a precious potion on a knight. Their loyalty to Louis increased once again. "My lord," Lambert whispered, "you should waste such a potion on him." Louis stood up, smiling calmly. "He fought for me, for the Crimson Tide territory. How is it a waste to use it on him?" His gaze swept over everyone present, his voice firm. "Those who serve me, I will not easily abandon." For a moment, all the knights straightened their backs in silence. They bowed their heads, clutching their chests, responding with a knightly salute, their silence more resolute than any oath. Actually, Louis also felt a pang of regret for this potion. It was a life-saving potion secretly given to him by his sister, before he went to the north, and there were only 3 bottles in total. The first was given to the unconscious Sif. The second was given to the severely wounded knight. Now, he only had one left. Thinking of this, he felt a complex mix of emotions. It would be a lie to say he wasn't heartbroken. This was a life-saving item, something that could potentially save his life in a critical moment. Yet, he had used it all up. However, he didn't regret it. He had saved Sif. Perhaps one day, this little princess of the Frost Moon tribe would bring him some value. He had also saved the knight. It would let the soldiers of the Crimson Tide territory know that their lord wouldn't easily abandon them, thus building unity. "Never mind, I'll keep the last bottle for myself," Louis sighed softly, casually putting the empty bottle into his pocket. Next was the reward ceremony. Louis stood solemnly before everyone, personally awarding prizes to each meritorious individual as the lord. "In this campaign, we annihilated 4 frost giants. Everyone deserves credit. If it were any other lord, perhaps they wouldn't hold a special reward ceremony, but I'm different. Merit should be rewarded." He paused, looking at the expectant eyes of the crowd, his lips twitching slightly. "However, I think you all know, I'm really poor." The soldiers exchanged glances, then someone chuckled. Louis shrugged helplessly. "But since you've done so well, there has to be some reward." His words were met with cheers and applause. The reward was simple: fresh fish, game, grain, and a small amount of gold coins, but no one showed any dissatisfaction. They knew Louis had already done enough. He wasn't a lord who only made empty promises. He was willing to save his soldiers. He was willing to reward them, even if he was short of money, after their bloody battles. Moreover, most lords who went to fight alien races or monsters didn't give their soldiers or knights any reward for their merits. After the battle, they were given a chance to rest. But Louis was different. Their lord would personally acknowledge their contributions and promise more rewards in the future. This was what they valued most. "Serving our lord is our honor. May the dragon ancestor protect the Crimson Tide territory." All the soldiers and knights had no complaints, and were even grateful. They happily accepted the modest reward, their faces beaming with satisfaction. As for what to do with the giant corpses, that was the problem. Food was scarce in the north, and every piece of meat was incredibly precious. If it were ordinary prey, it would have already been skinned, butchered, and sent to the smoking room to be dried. But the frost giants were, after all, humanoid creatures. Louis looked at the enormous corpses and felt a sense of unease. Moreover, Although the Crimson Tide territory was short of resources, it wasn't to the point of having to resort to such methods to fill its stomach. Don't eat them. Take them all back for disposal, he decisively ordered. The knights had no objections, their lord always acted with principle. But discarding the corpses would be too wasteful. After all, the bodies of these frost giants contained immense cold energy, and even in death, their flesh and blood were still rich in special nutrients. Thinking of this, Lewis suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Since we can't eat them, let's make the most of them. We can turn them into fertilizer. Fertilizer? Lambert was slightly taken aback, then nodded thoughtfully. That was a good idea. The giant's flesh and blood were rich in magical energy. If processed, it should greatly improve the barrenness of the Red Tide Territory's land. Take them back and hand them over to the agricultural officer, Mick, for processing. So the soldiers began clearing the battlefield, dragging the giants' corpses onto makeshift wooden frames, and slowly transporting them back to the Red Tide Territory by horses. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.